Chapter 1156. Why are you here? At this moment, Xianxia did not feel the slightest joy of meeting an old friend in a foreign land. Instead, there was a chilling, killing intent in his eyes. The woman knelt on the mat and bowed deeply to Xianxia with her thin back. She clasped the mat with both hands and did not say a word. Answer. Not only did Xianxia's face turn cold, but his voice also became cold. Why did they look for you? To deal with me? The last three words were full of sarcasm and contempt. Not talking. Seeing that she was pretending to be dead, Xianxia was furious and wanted to leave. Seeing that he really turned around, the woman hurriedly knelt and hugged his legs, sobbing softly. Don't go. If you leave, both my son and I will die. Xianxia tried to pull his legs out, but the woman hugged him tightly. He could not move at all and could not break free. Lieutenant Jiang, help. Xianxia tried his best but still failed. He could only shout angrily outside the room. The woman who was hugging his legs was stunned. She saw a maid dressed in plain clothes walk in from outside the door. The maid didn't even look at Xianxia. She raised her hand and grabbed the back of the woman's collar, lifting her up. You want to shout for help for such a woman? Military advisor Yang, do you really not need to see the doctor? He did not eat the meat bun that was sent to him, and his legs were trapped by the meat bun and could not break free. Jiang Nongqin felt that she was out of touch with the whole world. Was a man so thin and weak? She looked down and Xianxia subconsciously took a few steps back. When he understood the meaning of her words, his already ugly face darkened. You two know each other? Seeing that Xianxia did not speak, Jiang Nongqin glanced at the woman who was thrown aside with tears on her cheeks. Xianxia said, more than that. Oh, Jiang Nongqin said. Thinking of Xianxia's usual style, she asked, Dewey couple? Was it a love debt? Xianxia was speechless. He really could not afford to offend women. His previous style was indeed not good, but in Jiang Nongqin's eyes, was it so bad? The woman was a little hurt from the fall, but she did not dare to move closer to Xianxia. Instead, she looked at Jiang Nongqin with a critical gaze. She had been in brothels for more than 10 years and her eyes were very sharp. She could tell at a glance that Jiang Nongqin, who was still dressed as an unmarried woman, was not a virgin. Jiang Nongqin immediately felt the hostility in the woman's eyes. Jealousy, hatred, contempt, disgust. Wasn't it just a fall? Was there such a big grudge? This is the main course of the Hongmen banquet? Jiang Nongqin raised her eyebrows as she asked Xianxia. Su Bei had gone through so much trouble to invite Xianxia to a banquet. She had thought that it was a honey trap and a plan to sow discord between Xianxia and the Lord. She did not expect that he would actually send a 27 or 28-year-old woman. At this age, she could be preparing to be a mother-in-law, right? Xianxia said snappily, I guess so. The woman in front of him had witnessed the worst part of Xianxia's past. Now that he had been caught red-handed by Jiang Nongqin, he felt uncomfortable all over. The woman asked, Who are you? Jiang Nongqin sneered in response. He did not want to answer. This woman's background was unknown. How could she be qualified to question her? She casually found a place to sit so that Xianxia wouldn't ask her for help later. When Xianxia saw that she refused to leave, he felt even more embarrassed. He only wanted to end the battle quickly and settle the matter as soon as possible. Tell me, why are you here? The woman was frozen by his coldness. Her shoulders shivered and she bit her lower lip. She did not have much contact with Xianxia, but she knew that he had a ruthless temperament. I heard that you've won the favor of a noble and that you're now on a meteoric rise. I don't ask for anything else. I only ask that you do a good deed and save me and fourth son. As long as you ask for it, we can be saved. Xianxia sneered. On what basis? The woman thought about it and gritted her teeth. On what sister said before she died. Xianxia's eyes were filled with murderous intent, but he wore a smile on his face. He asked, You have the cheek to mention them? I've already done my part by redeeming you from the brothel before I left Jiangding County. Now that you've appeared here, you must be up to no good. How can you have the cheek to ask for it? Jiang Nongqin, who was watching from the side, acted as a spectator and watched the drama that was filled with gratitude and hatred. The woman said with tears in her eyes, I'm just a weak woman. If I didn't do this, I would have been skinned and died without a complete corpse. Xianxia did not want to listen to this person's lies. The woman continued, I lied to those people and said that fourth son is your flesh and blood. Then they captured him. If you're not willing to help, we really can't live. Yang Jingrong, can you help us for the sake of Dean Yang and the others? Yangxi was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. Although he had a romantic life like Feng Longzi, he had never thought that he would be a father. The woman repeated the two sentences over and over again. When Yangxi redeemed her from the brothel, she turned over a new leaf and married a man. However, that honest man had a short life. He died not long after, leaving her and the 3-month-old child in her womb. Her mother-in-law had always held a grudge against her past and suspected that she was a posthumous child. She cruelly drove her out of the house. Later, she remarried to another man who also died not long after. The third man lived a little longer. She thought that her life was stable, but she did not expect that her husband would be captured to do forced labor and die. Life was really hard for a woman with a child. There was chaos outside, so she could only marry again. The fourth man was an idle gambler. When he had no money, he beat her and her son. He even scolded her that she could not have a child after a few years of marriage because she had served too many men in the past. After that, the family was so poor that they could not live on anymore. He actually planned to let her resume her old job and make her son a servant to serve other men. In a rage, she picked up the firewood knife at home and chopped the man to death. The neighbors seized her and sent her to the magistrate's office. In order to survive, she could only mention Yangxi. She did not know anything else, but she knew that Yangxi had met a benefactor and became a superior person. She might be able to survive if she had a relationship with him. Does the military counselor have a son who was left outside? Jiang Nongqin could not help but ask. Logically, Jiang Nongqin felt that the possibility was very high. After all, Yangxi and Fengzhen were jackals of the same tribe. However, Yangxi said, "There's no such thing. Don't taint my innocence. But I see that you two are quite close." Yangxi brushed it off. "We just met when we were young. Just now she said that she lied to others that sea air is your flesh and blood. Could it be that those people want to use a fake son, wife and child to threaten you? However, Su Bei and the others are not stupid. If you have nothing to do with this woman, they won't believe her words so easily, right?" Yangxi really had no way to refute. That alone doesn't seem to be enough to threaten anything. Jiang Nongqin was puzzled. Yangxi said, "She used to be a prostitute." Jiang Nongqin instantly understood. Everyone knew about Yangxi's background. If he had a son with a prostitute and then abandoned them, he would be laughed at for the rest of his life. He could not choose his parents, but he did the same thing as his father. What did this mean? It meant that this thing could be inherited. The son of a prostitute would not be presentable in the end. Yangxi said again, her son was also detained. If war breaks out, the child will be sacrificed to the flag. Jiang Nongqin's expression darkened. If that was really the case, Yangxi's life would be over. The enemy could use this as leverage to secretly instigate Yangxi to defect. Of course, all of this had to be based on the fact that it was true. "You really have nothing to do with this woman?" "I know her, but there is no relationship. That child has nothing to do with me." Yangxi sighed and said, "She has 2 older sisters. The eldest sister is older than me and the second sister is the same age as me. Their house is next to the thatched cottage where I study. Her eldest sister is called Xiaonyang, and the second sister is the Dean Yang that I mentioned just now. Although Dean Yang is a woman, she is born intelligent and eager to learn. She can learn almost anything with just a little." As the eldest sister, Xiaonyang doted on her younger sister. She knew that her second sister was attracted by the neighbor's reading and she wanted to learn how to read too. Thus, she shamelessly went to ask for help. At first, Yangxi did not agree. How could an ignorant girl want to learn how to read? Later, he softened and agreed because Dean Yang's talent was beyond his imagination. This made Yangxi want to be serious. After more than a year, Yangxi became familiar with the neighbor. He and Dean Yang were the same age and they seemed to be childhood friends. However, their father was not a good person. When he was young, he owed a lot of gambling debts and was forced to flee to another place. Dean Yang's mother was willing to sell herself to the brothel so that her 3 daughters wouldn't be caught by the debt collectors. She worked hard for many years and got sick. After she died, she didn't even have a coffin. She was buried on the ground with a mat. When Dean Yang's father heard that the debt had been paid, he gathered his courage and came back. This bad person didn't learn his lesson. He hid in another place and gambled indiscriminately. When he came back, he wanted to sell the 3 sisters to the brothel. As mentioned before, Master Yuanjing had picked up Yangxi. Although he didn't bring him back to Langyi to be raised, he gave a sum of money to the farmer who adopted him and asked them to take care of him. Before Xianxia was enlightened, he came to visit him every 6 months. After Xianxia was enlightened, he came to visit him every 3 months. When Din Yang and her sisters were sold to the brothel by their father for money, Xianxia followed Master Yuanjing to study and learn how to write. When Master Yuanjing came back, he found out what had happened. Xianxia went to the brothel. The 15-year-old Xiaonyang had already combed herself up in a hurry and became a prostitute. Because she had a good foundation and a clean temperament, she became popular for a while. The 2 younger sisters escaped the disaster because they were young. They stayed in the brothel as maids. If he wanted to bring Xiaonyang out of the brothel, he had to spend money to redeem her or run away. Xianxia had no money, so he could only choose the latter. At that time, Xianxia was still very young, but his wisdom was no less than that of an ordinary teenager. Xiaonyang didn't want to be a prostitute for the rest of her life. She didn't want her 2 younger sisters to follow in her footsteps, so she agreed to my plan. There were many thugs in the brothel, but it wasn't difficult to lure them away. Xiaonyang wasn't a top courtesan and there weren't many people watching her, so she escaped quite smoothly. Unexpectedly. As he spoke, Xianxia glanced coldly at the woman who was trembling and didn't say a word. He was stupid. She only saw that the brothel had food, drinks and clothes to wear, so she didn't want to leave. Before she escaped, she hid and even sold her 2 older sisters in the end. The brothel was a very cruel place. If the girls who ran away were caught, how could they have a good ending? Xiaonyang knew that their whereabouts had been leaked. Once they were caught, they might still be alive, but Xianxia would definitely be beaten to death. Xiaonyang hid Xianxia in the cellar, and they were also caught by more than 20 thugs from the brothel who came later. Their ending was very tragic. Xianxia hid in the dark cellar, listening to the movements coming from above. The darkness and cramped space of the cellar almost drove him crazy. He wanted to climb out of the cellar countless times, but in the end he restrained himself. He had never hated himself so much for being so weak. Whether it was Xiaonyang, who was 15 years old, or Din Yang, who had just turned 10, how could they survive when faced with more than 20 wild men? In the beginning they struggled to survive, but in the end they were on the verge of death. When Xianxia came out of the cellar, he saw a scene of devastation. Xiaonyang didn't hate him. Instead, she begged him to take care of her 3rd younger sister if he had the ability. Din Yang's body was green and black. Before she died, she murmured, "It hurts." This incident also changed Xianxia's temperament, and he grew up quickly overnight. Xianxia buried the 2 sisters and hid for a while. Later he found out who had betrayed their whereabouts. It was my naivety that killed them. If it weren't for me, they might have had a hard time in the brothel, but at least they would still be alive. I'm sorry, but this person is also an accomplice. Xianxia pointed at the woman sitting paralyzed on the ground. I wanted to raise money to redeem her from the brothel before she got married, but she was very stupid. She believed the flowery words of some rich man and willingly became a concubine. Not long after, because of her flamboyant temperament, she was beaten by the legal wife and sold back to the brothel. I came to her and said that I wanted to redeem her, but she said that I could redeem her, but she wanted me to marry her as the legal wife. She made things difficult for me, so I refused. Xianxia was still brooding over the betrayal of the woman. Since she was so eager to die, he simply pretended to be deaf and dumb and watched her flop in the brothel alone. When the world was in chaos, Xianxia thought about going out to explore. Before he left, he asked his errand boy to redeem the woman from the brothel with money. After that, he didn't know what happened. When they met again, the other party actually wanted him to be a father. After Jiang Nongqin heard this, she was speechless for a long time. No matter what Su Bei was planning, he couldn't have used this woman and her child to threaten me. Xianxia said coldly, "Although I'm dissolute in private, I don't want just anyone. At least, I don't want to touch even half a finger of this person." The woman said timidly, "I was still young then, I didn't understand at all." Xianxia snorted coldly, "You were young, but you betrayed your sister with a clear mind and a glib tongue." The woman continued, "Although I was wrong, you also said that my sister didn't blame me." Xianxia sneered, "That's why you could escape from the brothel and not die under the hands of some man." The woman revealed a look of despair. "Yang Jingrong, how could you be so cruel? How could you bear to watch the only child of the 3 of us die here?" "Of course I could bear to. In the future I'll find 2 good adopted sons for them and put them under their names. The young Yangxi had been affected by that incident, causing him to be depressed and on the verge of a breakdown. But now he was able to take it lightly. Or perhaps, it could be said that he had seen many people who were even more miserable than this and had long developed a heart of stone. Jiang Nongqin frowned and said, "Even if you have nothing to do with her, if Su Bei were to blame you and use the mother and son as a reason to criticize you," Yang Xi's situation was worrying. Chapter 1157. The woman no longer looked dispirited. Her facial features contorted in agitation. "Yang Jingrong, how can you slander Seer's bloodline?" The woman was so agitated that her chest rose and fell violently. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She said, "His father and I went through a formal wedding ceremony. He's not the bloodline of a benefactor, nor is he the son of a prostitute. I was young and ignorant in the past. That's why I made such a huge mistake. Now that I want to turn over a new leaf, why are you still so aggressive?" She was only 6 or 7 years old then. How would she know what a prostitute meant? She only knew that she could eat and drink in a brothel. Wasn't this life much better than being penniless in the past? Yang Xi said that she betrayed her sister, but she really didn't know that there would be such serious consequences. She only wanted her sister to come back and enjoy life with her. The woman couldn't help but find excuses to lessen her guilt. "Did I stop you when you wanted to turn over a new leaf?" Yang Xi snorted coldly and looked at her coldly. "You shouldn't have bitten people for no reason. Tell me, why should I risk my own safety to save you and your son? Do you really think this is so simple? That it'll be over just like how you served your benefactor in the past? How dare you get involved in a battle between dukes?" The woman lowered her head and trembled in fear. Her skinny body trembled like a sieve, making one feel pity for her. Jiang Nongqin pulled out a dagger from her waist and blew on the blade, making the shiny blade even colder. "Military advisor Yang, this woman is quite an eyesore. I'm afraid she'll cause trouble." "Why don't?" She turned her wrist and twirled the dagger in her hand. It was so nimble that it seemed to be a part of her body. It sent chills down one's spine. The woman was so frightened that her face turned pale. Her skinny body leaned back. You can't kill me." She lost her sense of propriety after being frightened. "Why would Su Bei and the rest think that she can seduce you?" Jiang Nongqin sneered. "Honey trap. Why doesn't she look in the mirror and have an idea? It's not enough to just have a face and a body. She has to be intelligent and fearless in the face of danger." Yang Xi said, "You can't ask for too much. If she could do what you said, she wouldn't have ended up like this." Jiang Nongqin asked, "How do you plan to deal with her?" Killing people was definitely out of the question. Firstly, Yang Xi might not be willing to do it. Secondly, killing people would be suspected of having a guilty conscience, which would instead give the enemy something to use against him. Yang Xi spoke as the woman waited anxiously. "Let her fend for herself. I don't want to dirty my hands." Once Su Bei found out that the woman had lied to him, he would not show any mercy. The woman became more and more flustered. Ignoring her fear, she crawled on the ground trying to grab the corner of Yang Xi's clothes. "Yang Jingrong, please help me one last time. Give us a way out." Before her fingers could even touch it, a foot kicked her shoulder, causing her to roll back twice. "There's no turning back, but this is your choice. Kneel and walk on." Jiang Nongqin retracted her leg and looked at the woman calmly. The woman looked at Yang Xi's heartless back with tears in her eyes. Sorrow welled up in her heart and she sobbed loudly. After watching for a while, Jiang Nongqin felt bored. When the woman saw her high and mighty appearance, her heart was filled with unbearable anger. "Do you think you can get what you want just because I can't have it?" The woman covered her shoulder and gritted her teeth. "It's just a mere tong fong." Clang. Yang Xi's legs went limp. If he had not reacted in time and grabbed the door frame, he might have fallen out of the corridor. What the hell? Yang Xi looked as if he had seen a ghost. The old man was old and could not be so startled. The woman's vision was limited. Seeing that Jiang Nongqin's hair was unmarried but not pure, she thought that she was Yang Xi's maidservant. At most she was like a tongfang. She did the work of a servant and had to serve the male master of the house at night. However, she could not be considered a proper master. Jiang Nongqin said with a faint smile, "You said that you can't get what you want. Could it be that you want to cling on to the military counselor and become his legal wife?" The woman's thoughts were exposed. She blushed and lowered her head to avoid his sharp gaze. She had led a tough life in the first half of her life. Now that there was a chance for her to build a relationship with Xianxia, she would definitely not let it go. Even if she could not become his legal wife, it would be good to be a concubine in his residence. In this way she and her son would have hope for the rest of their lives. In her heart, her two sisters had already forgiven her for the mistakes she made when she was young. In that case, Xianxia was the murderer who killed her two sisters. He had the obligation to take care of her on behalf of his sisters. Those were two living lives. This was what he owed. Little did she know that the lives in Xianxia's hands were in the tens of thousands. He was willing to bicker with her for the sake of his two deceased old friends. Otherwise he would have beaten her to death long ago. The woman straightened her neck and said, "So what if I am?" "Nothing, he's too old." Jiang Nongqin said, "He's too old to be a boy toy in the backyard." Xianxia was speechless. If he had not held onto the door frame he might have fallen to the ground. Jiang Nongqin turned to look at Xianxia. Military Counselor Yang is already over 30 years old. He's indeed old. Am I right? No, you're right. He had been stabbed several times, but he had to grit his teeth and admit that the other party had stabbed him well. Yes. Whatever the little fairy said was right. Xianxia came to the banquet out of curiosity. He did not expect to be fed a mouthful of sh*t. He even had a belly full of anger. Let's go home. Zhou Xian soon received the news and hurriedly brought people over. Could it be that the beauty arranged is not to your liking, sir? Xianxia said, not only is it not to my liking, but it's also extremely nauseating. Zhou Xian secretly observed his expression and was puzzled. Xianxia's reaction was very different from what he had imagined. The servants did not treat you well and neglected you. I'll go and give them a warning now. Zhou Xian persuaded earnestly, it's getting late now. Why don't you stay for the night so that I can be a good host? I wonder how that beauty offended you. Xianxia said, that person tried to claim friendship as soon as she came up. Her motive is suspicious. C has seen her before. She used to be a flower lady in Jiangding County. There were countless people around her. General Zhao gave her away. Is he trying to befriend her or is he trying to pick a fight? C wanted to ask General Zhao what he meant by this. This woman even said with certainty that she had C's flesh and blood. What a joke. She's just a prostitute. Who knows whose flesh and blood is in her belly? What's more, there's nothing between C and her. General Zhao comes from a prestigious family. Your family is upright and upright. You definitely won't let C be slandered by such a woman, right? Zhou Xian looked embarrassed and said, that woman took the initiative to come to me to make a statement. I saw that she had irrefutable evidence and believed her words. I had the intention of reuniting Mr. Yang with the mother and son. Who would have thought that my good intentions would cause trouble? Xianxia sneered. If General Zhao doesn't believe me, you can check C's birth date and the time when C left Jiangding County. There's a gap of 3 to 5 months. Prostitutes are best at sweet words and sowing discord. General Zhao actually believed them? Zhou Xiao's face turned green and white. Mr. Yang is right. The words of prostitutes cannot be trusted. After all, dirty blood flows in their bones. No matter what, it's not something that can be put on the table. Don't be angry, Mr. Yang. I'll send people to deal with the mother and son right now to restore Mr. Yang's reputation. Chapter 1158. Zhou Xian seemed to have realized Xi's abnormality. He suddenly patted his forehead and smiled apologetically at him. Mr. Yang, I didn't mean to target you with those words just now. Please don't take it to heart. Zhou Xian hated Xianxia very much. It was not that Xianxia had offended him. In fact, it was his first time meeting Xianxia. He had only heard of his name before. However, Xianxia was born in a lowly family. He was the son of a prostitute. Who knew who his father was? To put it bluntly, any man could sleep with Xianxia's mother with a little money. Wasn't that disgusting? Zhou Xian even thought that if Xianxia's mother was still alive and he gave her some money to serve another man in front of her son, would she do it? As a son, would Xianxia commit suicide out of shame and anger? How humiliating and mocking would that be? The blood flowing in Xianxia's bones was the original sin. He was just the son of a prostitute. Instead of staying in a brothel and being a pimp to be ordered around, he dressed like a scholar and came out to be an eyesore. Every time Zhou Xian thought about it, he felt extremely disgusted. What right did he have to be treated as a guest of honor and drink with him? Being in the same room, Zhou Xian disliked Xianxia for dirtying the air. Suppressing this disgust, Zhou Xiao used the mother and son as a raft to humiliate Xianxia indirectly. He suddenly felt carefree. Xianxia was still indifferent. However, Jiang Nongqin, who was not far away, felt her hands itching. She wanted to put her hand on the dagger at her waist several times. "It's okay." Xianxia looked calm and said with a smile, "I just heard someone's words and felt that they made sense. Since there is no way back, you have to move forward even if you have to kneel. This is the general principle. This is the sin that I've committed with my own hands. I have to swallow this bitter fruit even if I cry." Zhao Xiao thought about it and suddenly realized that Xianxia was also mocking him. "What do you mean, Mr. Yang?" He pretended not to know. "I heard that when General Zhao was young, you had some disagreements with the late commandant of Dongmen County, Yang Jian." Xianxia had a faint smile on his face as he coldly observed Zhao Xiao's unnatural expression. "I heard that Commandant Yang Jian didn't die of a sudden illness. Instead, he fell into the evil trap of a villain and unfortunately died in his prime. Commandant Yang Jian had a great reputation in Zhangzhou, and my master even had an alliance with him. When he was suddenly informed of his death, he was saddened for a long time, and he said that the world lost another loyal and valiant general. The Buddha speaks of karma. That villain who poisoned me should die a horrible death, right?" Zhao Xiao's face was livid, and his eyes were wide open from hatred and killing intent, almost to the point of splitting. Yangxi's eyes were slightly closed and he still looked calm and collected. It was a pain in the ass. Fortunately, although Commandant Yang Jian is dead, his legacy has not been lost. His only son Yang Tao was now an outstanding talent. He was so filial to his late father, how could he easily let go of the enemy who killed his father? When his wings are full and he catches the villain who poisoned him. Yangxia glanced at Zhao Xiao and sneered. The hatred of his father's killer is absolutely irreconcilable. Cutting him into 1,000 pieces or flaying him to light a lamp won't be enough to vent his anger. Cutting him into 1,000 pieces was easy to understand, but what was flaying him to light a lamp? Rumor had it that during the troubled times of the 16 Kingdoms, there was a small country called Jing. This flaying him to light a lamp was a punishment specially invented by the last emperor of Jing Kingdom to amuse his favorite concubine. A long cut was made on the human skin from head to toe, and mercury was poured into it. The prisoner was in unbearable pain and his skin would break out. In this way, a complete human skin could be removed, and the remaining bloody and skinless body would be squeezed out of the human fat. The prisoner who had lost his human skin would be tied up, and the layer of fat on his abdomen would be dug out and a lamp would be lit. Just the thought of the scene sent chills down one's spine. Zhao Xiao looked at Yangxia with anger, shock and fear. He was pointing at the mulberry tree and cursing the locust tree in front of Yangxia, so Yangxia simply exposed him and threatened him. Zhao Xiao suppressed his fear and cursed in his heart. The son of a lowly prostitute. There are still many government affairs to settle in the military camp. It's not good for me to stay outside for too long to avoid delaying official business. I'll take my leave first. Yangxia declined Zhao Xiao's invitation to stay expressionlessly. The two of them hated each other. What else could they do if they stayed behind other than to hurt each other? Zhao Xiao had no choice but to let them go. Jiang Nongqin boarded the horse carriage and looked at Yangxia, who was sitting in the carriage with his eyes closed. She lifted the curtain and glanced at Long Shui. "Will Zhao Xiao, that old fellow, send someone to kill us?" Jiang Nongqin was in a bad mood and wanted to find a few people to vent her anger on. Killing the enemy was the best way. It's hard to say. He wants to settle things once and for all, but he can't get past Su Bei. Su Bei was a person who wanted to save face and suffered. He was always acting like an aristocratic family, so it was impossible for him to lower his status and ambush Yangxia. Jiang Nongqin said, "I shouldn't have come today. I didn't get any useful information and instead I suffered a bellyful of anger." She really wanted to twist Zhao Xiao's head off and kick it like a ball. Yangxia glanced at Jiang Nongqin from the corner of his eyes and laughed. "What's Field Officer Jiang angry about?" Jiang Nongqin raised her eyebrows and asked, "Military Advisor Yang, aren't you angry at all? Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Yangxia is just an ordinary person, how can he be immune? It's impossible for him not to be angry, but what can he do even if he's angry?" Yangxia sneered, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. Saints also say that when heaven is about to bestow a great responsibility on a man, he must first suffer his will, tire his muscles and bones, starve his skin and empty his body. So what if he's arrogant? The one who stands at the end is the winner. So what if he's the son of a prostitute? One day I'll make these people bend their knees and bend their waists, lower their heads and break their proud and unyielding character. As she spoke, Jiang Nongqin saw Xianxia gripping the corner of the table so tightly that his fingers almost dug into the table. Some people became more and more timid when faced with the malice and attacks of the entire world, until they lost the courage to live. However, Xianxia was different. The more others slandered him, humiliated him, mocked him, belittled him, despised him and hated him, the more he wanted to live freely. His weakness could not be exchanged for the sympathy and pity of others. It would only become a weakness that his enemies could use to ridicule and belittle him. In that situation just now, if the military counselor had given the order, I would have definitely taken the head of the old thief, Xiao. In Jiang Nongqin's opinion, these weak scholars were all treasures, little princesses that needed to be pampered and pampered. Xianxia said, "No, we can't do that. Xiao is still useful." Jiang Nongqin was surprised. "What's the use of that old thief?" Yang Tao has been expanding his power in Nanxing. Now he has become an opponent that can't be ignored. Jiang Nongqin thought about it and asked, "Do you mean to sell Zhao Xiao to Yang Tao as a personal favor?" "Although it's not right, I've guessed some things." Xia's fingers tapped on the table. The carriage was swaying and it was so quiet outside that only the sound of the wheels could be heard. How can Field Officer Jiang not find it strange? That woman is Huan Yang from Jiangding County in Qinzhou, which is far away from Shanghai County and Zhe County. Jiang Nongqin was stunned. She really didn't think of this. Qinzhou is Huang Song's territory. According to that woman, she killed her husband with her own hands and was facing the death penalty. In order to survive, she indiscriminately accused me. If that's the case, do you think it's possible that the woman ended up in Su Bei's hands without going through Huang Song? Xianxia said, "The only possibility is that this woman was sent to Su Bei by Huang Song. In other words, Huang Song and Su Bei may have formed an alliance in private. If they didn't have this layer of alliance, Huang Song could have kept this trump card and used it at the right time to ruthlessly defeat Xianxia. Even if that mother and son had nothing to do with Xiaxia's reputation would be completely ruined. Refuting rumors would never catch up with spreading rumors. Therefore, Xianxia could basically conclude that the two troublemakers Huang Song and Su Bei were in cahoots. Jiang Nongqin's mind was in a mess. If not for Xiaxia's reminder, she wouldn't have realized it at all. "What does this have to do with Xiao?" Xianxia said, "Yang Tao is a filial son. If he knew that Xiao had already sneaked back to Dongqing and joined Su Bei's camp as a low-key surplus general, do you think Yang Tao could tolerate it? Su Bei has taken over half of Zhangzhou. Yang Tao has yet to settle this score with him." Yang Tao dug deep into Nanxing to search for Xiao. He never expected that Xiao would sneak back to Dongqing. Nowadays, communication technology was extremely backward. There were no cell phones, telephones, or the internet. One had to walk when they left home and shout when they made calls. An international letter would take more than half a year on the road. Xiao sincerely wanted to hide from Yang Tao, but Yang Tao's attention was on Nanxing. Yang Tao really couldn't do anything to him. Su Bei and Huang Song are in cahoots. Why can't our Lord present Buddha with borrowed flowers and do Yang Tao a favor by outflanking Su Bei? Xi's gaze was heavy. His eyes were filled with coldness. "Officer Jiang, I'm curious. How should this Xiao die? Anyone who offended him could forget about getting on his good side." The sky had just turned bright when Xianxia and the rest returned. They washed up a little and went to see Jiang Pingji. "You went over to have a meal and saved him?" Jiang Pingji teased. "Su Bei is really stingy. At least send a beauty to entertain him." "Xianxia, please stop talking. Everything that happened yesterday was like a nightmare." His heart was in turmoil, but his face was calm and collected. Xianxia briefly explained what happened last night. Then he told her about his analysis of Jiang Nongqin. Xianxia went out for a while. Once he returned, he formulated the next strategic route. They would form an alliance with Yang Tao and besiege Su Bei. Then they would turn around and deal with Huang Song. After getting rid of Huang Song, they would either try to encroach on Zhongzhou's territory or backstab their new ally Yang Tao. Jiang Pingji, Xianxia was more skilled at killing acquaintances than she was. Jiang Pingji summoned the civil and military officials in her camp for a military meeting. Most of them voted in favor of Yangxi's suggestion. If Su Bei and Huang Song formed an alliance, it wasn't that Jiang Pingji couldn't fight. It was just that the battle line would be stretched too far. If Huang Song was shameless and directly launched a sneak attack on the main camp in Wanzhou, Jiang Pingji's side would be very passive. If they formed an alliance with Yang Tao, they could set the battle line in the south and restrict the troops of Huang Song and the rest. Who is willing to seek an alliance with Nanxing? Taking the initiative to form an alliance required a sincere attitude. It was necessary to send a capable general. The Sichuan plain of Hu County was less than 10 days' journey from the border of Nanxing. It would take at least a month to find Yang Tao and talk about forming an alliance. However, they weren't clear about the situation in Nanxing. After a moment of silence, Wei Xi stepped forward and volunteered. I am willing to resolve my lord's problems. Among the people in the camp, he was the most suitable. In his previous life, he had assisted An Chui in conquering half of Nanxing. He had spent a lot of effort on that. No one knew it better than him. Jiang Pingji frowned. After a while she asked, Zixiao, are you confident? 100%. Chapter 1159. Zixiao, please treat this trip to Nanxing with caution. After the crowd dispersed, Qiguanrang could not help but remind Wei Xi. Wei Xi turned his head upon hearing the voice. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. He had a sharp nature. It was not like he was unaware of Qiguanrang's wariness and suspicion towards him. Aside from official business, they rarely interacted with each other in private, let alone this kind of advice to a friend. Qiguanrang raised his eyelids and said lightly, the Lord's decision to form an alliance with Yang Tao was only to reduce the pressure on the battlefront. She wasn't afraid of the alliance between the Huang and Su families. Since they were going to fight anyway, it would be the same sooner or later. When you go to Nanxing, it's best if you can persuade Yang Tao. If you can't, it's fine too. At the end of the day, the war can be fought at any time. The difference lies in the length of time and the degree of difficulty. But there is only one Wei Xi in the world. On the surface, Wei Xi did not show any extreme reaction, but in his heart he was somewhat fearful. Ever since Wei Xi had ascertained who was responsible for the meteorite falling from the sky in his past life, he did not expect to gain Qiguanrang's approval and trust. This was because the theory of rebirth was too absurd. Other than the Lord, no one else would believe it. Since Wei Xi could not be honest, he naturally could not completely dispel Qiguanrang's suspicions. Wenjing, do you think there will be other changes during the trip to Nanxing? Wei Xi pretended to be confused. That's not it. Qiguanrang shook his head. I'm just reminding you to be careful and protect yourself. Don't force yourself. If Wei Xi was just an ordinary strategist, it would be fine. However, he was a fat piece of meat that his lord had her eyes on. She could not let him be taken away by others. Of course, his concern for Wei Xi did not mean that he did not suspect him. Wei Xi accepted the other party's goodwill. However, I'm afraid the lord is angry. From the time he volunteered to bring his men to Nanxing, Wei Xi had not found a chance to speak to Jiang Pingji. The two of them met in a public place, so there was no chance for them to talk alone. According to Wei Xi's understanding of her, it was highly likely that she was angry. However, if time could be reversed and he was given another chance to choose, Wei Xi would still step forward. Didn't he want to do his best to help her ascend the throne and create a better and more glorious situation than his previous life? If he couldn't make up for the regrets of his previous life, wouldn't his rebirth be meaningless? Wei Xi rode on the horse and looked back at the tents that were gradually getting further and further behind him, until the tents that were like mountains disappeared into the horizon. To ensure Wei Xi's safety, Jiang Pingji assigned many guards to him. A portion of them transformed into the guards of the courtyard to protect Wei Xi, who was disguised as a fleeing country gentleman. The other portion transformed into refugees and hid in the dark. He would first take the land route, then he would change to the waterway before changing to the land route. He would cross the border between Zhangzhou and Nanxing and enter Nanxing's boundary. Wei Xi thought that Jiang Pingji was angry, so she ignored him in a tsundere manner and even gave him a one-sided Cold War. Little did he know that his situation was completely under Jiang Pingji's control. The Yinyang jade pendant was a gift from Jiang Pingji. Wei Xi always wore it close to his body. He never took it off even when he bathed. In his eyes, the Yin and Yang jade pendant was just a jade pendant given by his lord. But in Jiang Pingji's eyes, it was an excellent dating artifact. It was fine if Wei Xi was far away. She would be able to see him whenever she missed him. The reason why she did not tell Wei Xi her parting words in private was that she did not want to put too much pressure on him. Langjun, we have arrived at Nanxing's boundary. Wei Xi came out of the cabin when he heard the voice. The scenery of the lake and mountains before him was mesmerizing. It was a vast expanse of blue and the lush green mountains were falling backward. Nanxing was much warmer than Dongqing. When summer came, the scorching sun shone on the earth. Occasionally there would be continuous rain. Half a month ago he was still wearing his spring clothes. When he arrived at Nanxing, he immediately changed into a summer shirt made of light material. This is Xianxia River. Wei Xi looked at the familiar scenery and suddenly felt like he had traveled through time. It was as if he had returned to the time when he accompanied In Cui to Nanxing. It was the season when the river water flowed rapidly. The ships heading south almost did not need boatmen to paddle. They could travel 1,000 miles in a day. The wind from the ships blew against their faces. I didn't expect to have a chance to return in this lifetime. There was no one around. Wei Xi murmured. He stood at the bow of the ship and gazed into the distance. The wind from the river passed through the mountains and the water, blowing against his face. It blew against his wide sleeves and his headscarf. Wei Xi volunteered to come to Nanxing not only to persuade Yang Tao to form an alliance. In reality, it was not difficult to persuade Yang Tao. Any strategist under the Lord's command could do it. Yang Tao was a filial son. His hatred for Zhou Xian was like In Cui's hatred for the 4 factions of Nanman. He would hack the enemy into pieces even if he had to go to heaven or hell. Being loyal was his strength, but it was also his most fatal weakness. If not for Yanlin's old maid's constant reminders, Yang Tao would have courted death long ago. His experience from his past life told Wei Xi that Yang Tao was not meant to rule the world. Wei Xi's expression was a little complicated as he thought about what happened in his past life. In his past life, those who fought with His Majesty for the world either killed themselves because they could not stand the failure or were beheaded by His Majesty. Most of them did not have a good ending. It was not that His Majesty could not tolerate them. On the contrary, these feudal vassals had been raised by the chaos of the world. How could they be willing to be under someone else when the world was at peace? They always had various concerns. They were worried that His Majesty would be afraid of them and harm them. Rather than struggling at death's door under his old enemy, it was better to end it all. If he died before the chaos ended, he would be considered a hero of his generation. Yang Tao was the odd one out among them. His Majesty used powerful troops to suppress Yang Tao. Yanlin was defeated and fell into the trap. Guess what that brat Yang Tao did? He was willing to give up everything in exchange for Yanlin's life. At that time, Yang Tao still had an extremely rich territory. If he gathered his troops, he could still resist for a few months. He surrendered without hesitation. Yanlin was so angry that he picked up his weapon and hammered Yang Tao. Wei Xi really wanted to cry out for His Majesty. His Majesty was not a narrow-minded person. In his past life, when Yang Tao surrendered, His Majesty did not make things difficult for his family. He even gave him the important task of leading troops to conquer the world. After the Jiang dynasty was founded, Yang Tao was conferred the title of nobility. Although it was not hereditary, as long as his descendants were successful, at least his family would be able to gain a foothold in the court. That was not all. He was also one of the 10 generals who entered the Golden Scale Pavilion. If the title of nobility was a little exaggerated and somewhat comforting, then entering the Golden Scale Pavilion was a real military achievement. Of course, the Golden Scale Pavilion in his past life was not the Golden Scale Pavilion of today. Today, the Golden Scale Pavilion was an academy where countless books were gathered. But in his past life, the Golden Scale Pavilion was also known as Path to Heaven, meaning to ascend to heaven in one step. Only civil and military officials who had made great contributions to the people, the court, and the emperor were qualified to have their portraits placed in the pavilion and enjoy the incense offerings of the royal family and the people. Even if the emperor came to the Golden Scale Pavilion, he still had to dismount from his carriage and walk to offer incense. Yang Tao was in the top 5. His friend and mother Yanlin was in the top 3. No ranking. Not popular. This was very sad. Chapter 1160. Although he was ambitious, when he thought of the current lineup under the Lord's tent, even Wei Xi could not help but gasp. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get a place. In his previous life, His Majesty had specially built the Golden Scale Pavilion to commend the meritorious officials. 10 civil and military officials were to be selected. At first it was decided that they would take 9 people each. This was because the number of people in the world started with 1 and ended with 9. The number 10 was not auspicious. However, His Majesty was stubborn and stubbornly insisted on choosing 10 people, implying that everything was perfect. The other officials' objections were ineffective. Not to mention others, Suku, Fengjin and Sunwen, the 3 of them died in a strange way in his previous life and had no fate with the Golden Scale Pavilion. It was different now. As long as they could survive until the world was settled, would the Golden Scale Pavilion be without them? The number of places on the list of civil officials had been reduced by 3. Thinking about the strategists who had successively submitted to the Lord in the previous life, Wuxia could not help but feel nervous. Why call it the Golden Scale Pavilion? Just call it the investiture of the gods. Wuxia sat at the bow of the boat, enjoying the golden sunlight and the fresh river breeze. He dug out the old almanac from the depths of his memory. Since there were ranks, there would naturally be a first and a second. But who would be the champion of civil and military affairs? The officials argued until their faces turned red. The commoners and the aristocratic families were at a stalemate. Although His Majesty had taken advantage of the chaotic times to beat the aristocratic families to the point that they did not dare to show their faces, the establishment of the Jiang dynasty was in urgent need of manpower. The aristocratic families were full of talents, and this was a good opportunity for them to take advantage of the situation. The civil and martial arts ranking list of the Golden Scale Pavilion had become the stage for them to compete against each other. The poor and the aristocratic families did not give way to each other, and the poor were slowly rising. If the second and third generation could stabilize their footsteps, sooner or later they would be able to enter the ranks of the noble families, and even become a new aristocratic family. Most of the important officials in the imperial court came from poor families, so the aristocratic families couldn't do anything to them. They could only pinch their noses and take a step back to prevent both sides from suffering. After all, His Majesty was above their heads. There were a total of 10 spots in the civil and martial role. The 2 factions would split it equally. How about this? After dividing the places, they began to fight for the first place in the civil and martial role. Fengju would definitely be the first among the civil officials, right? He had followed Her Majesty since she was still a bandit. Without Fengju's years of planning, Her Majesty's unification of the world would have been full of twists and turns. Yang Tao was definitely the number 1 general, right? His overall strength was very strong and his prestige in the military was very high. It didn't seem wrong for him to take first place. Wuxia had no objections to being the top civil official candidate, but the candidate for the top military general was really a scam. Did the aristocratic families think that the bonfire under Yang Tao's but wasn't strong enough and wanted to add another match? Yang Tao's identity was sensitive, and his martial arts were not top-notch. If he tried to compete for the number 1 general, he would be courting death. The aristocratic families didn't care about this. They couldn't accept being suppressed by the poor. The result? His Majesty had been sitting calmly on the fishing platform, indifferently watching their war of words. When the civil and military ranks were listed, the 2 sects were dumbfounded. They had been arguing for so long, but His Majesty had not taken their words seriously at all. The first civil official was not the popular candidate, Fengju. Instead it was Qiguan Rang, who came from a humble background and kept a low profile. Fengju was the second. This was something that even Wuxia had not expected. If he remembered correctly, he clearly remembered that His Majesty had placed Fengju's portrait first. The number 1 general was Fu Wang, a fellow who was criticized by the outside world for having the ambition of a wolf. His birth was extremely low. 60% of the people from poor families were from poor families. It was an overwhelming victory. However, the poor did not have the last laugh. In addition to the civil and military roles, His Majesty had also set up the Heavenly Works role. Unlike the aristocratic families or poor families that relied on their families to form a group or were about to form a group, the Heavenly Works role was only for individuals. Regardless of man or woman, poor or young, as long as they could invent things that benefited the people, the national defense and the country, they would contribute to the nation and benefit the world, they would all be on the roll. The country would come forward to promote their skills and would even give a portion of the profits to the individual. Although it was only a portion, the profits were enough to make all the merchants in the world jealous. The first bastard to be on the Heavenly Works roll had even taken a spot on the martial roll. He could be said to be a real winner in life. Wei Xi's trip to Nanxing this time was not only to persuade Yang Tao to form an alliance, but he also wanted to take that bastard away. This person was none other than the treasure that Wei Xi had found in his previous life, Bai Ning. He didn't believe that he wouldn't be able to coax that fellow to join in Chui's camp in his previous life. In this life he wouldn't be able to do the same. Wei Xi carefully checked his memory and found that there was nothing missing. Only then did he relax and lean against the bough to take a nap. Perhaps it was because what he thought about during the day Wei Xi kept muttering before he fell asleep. In his dreams he also remembered the content that he had not dug out. In his dreams, Wei Xi came to congratulate Bai Ning and congratulated him for making 2 rolls. However, the other party twirled his white beard. There was no joy on his face. Instead he looked depressed. Sai Zixiao. Among the visitors who came today, you are the only one who feels the most comfortable. It's just to congratulate you, nothing else. The other party looked at the fish pond under the corridor and said gloomily, I was born in a poor family. Naturally, I also want to compete with the aristocratic families in the court and fight for a way out for the vast number of scholars from poor families. But the person above us is really frightening. If it wasn't for His Majesty not allowing it, I really want to retire so that I don't have to be a rat in a bellows and be bullied by both sides. As a popular person he had received olive branches from both factions. However, Bai Ning, who knew the inside story, did not want to get involved. Hence he was worried. What do you mean? The other party asked mysteriously. How do you think I got on the Heavenly Craftsman roll? Wei Xi said, naturally it's because I offered the secret recipe for gunpowder and firearms, strengthened the national defense and contributed to the country. The other party chuckled and shook his head continuously. No. It's just because His Majesty likes me. Maybe it's because of you. Wei Xi was about to ask in detail when Bai Ning said earnestly, when the poor and the aristocratic families fight, both sides will suffer. No matter how they fight, can they escape from His Majesty's palm? To put it bluntly, even if His Majesty is a distinguished guest, as long as the royal bloodline is still there and the Heavenly Craftsman role is still there, both factions are just toys in the palm of the Emperor's hand. Zixiao, don't get involved. Wei Xi smiled bitterly, I'm just a small figure. How can I get involved in the battle between the gods? He had completely lost hope after the meteorite that fell from the sky a while ago. Well, if you think so, I have nothing to say. Bai Ning seemed to think of something and said, previously you supported the Wei family. The Wei family used the tiger skin to flaunt their strength and offended many people intentionally or unintentionally. Now that the situation is tense, the aristocratic families don't dare to go too far. You took the opportunity to lie low, which can be considered a good strategy for self-protection. How once the 3 roles of civil, martial and heavenly craftsmen are out, the mad dogs that bit you previously stopped. Then Bai Ning rambled on and on. Wei Xi listened carelessly at that time, drinking cup after cup of sake into his stomach. He could not remember what Bai Ning said, but it was very clear in the dream. Her Majesty can put whoever she wants on the heavenly crafts ranking. She'll throw you a prescription and let you take advantage of it for free and put on a show with her. With a whoosh, you'll be able to enter the imperial court even though you're just a commoner. This speed is even faster than ascension. To put it bluntly, the aristocratic families and the poor fight back and forth for the sake of benefits. The accumulation of generations is not as good as the rewards from His Majesty. Sai, the more I think about it, the more I feel that the water is too deep. It's better to go back to my hometown and continue to sell firecrackers. What's the use of fighting between the poor and aristocratic families? Zixiao, don't you think so? The aristocratic families referred to noble families that had been officials for generations. In the era when the dissemination of books and education was difficult, they occupied a lot of resources. After generations of accumulation, they educated countless talents. The educated talents could also consolidate the family's interests, accumulate more resources and make the entire interest group indestructible. In the end, the success of the aristocratic families lay in their rich capital, which allowed them to stand higher than others. If life was a competition, the poor were born at the starting point, while the aristocratic families were born at the halfway point or even the end. But, no matter how many resources the aristocratic families controlled, no matter how rich their heritage was, they were still limited by the development of the times. While everyone fought with cold weapons and on horseback, His Majesty could take out the recipe for gunpowder and more and give it to any trusted confidant. A small recipe, coupled with His Majesty's secret support, could instantly give birth to another rising force, disrupting the rhythm of the poor and aristocratic families. If they could not keep up with the pace of the times, regardless of whether they were aristocratic or poor, they would eventually be abandoned by the times. It was like flying a kite. The person who controlled the reel was His Majesty. How high and how far the kite flew was all in her control. Bai Ning always thought that His Majesty would go overboard, but it turned out that the people who went overboard were the aristocratic families and poor families. They were led by the nose and did not know it. Wei Xi clearly realized that he was dreaming, and the content was a memory deep in his mind. He remembered clearly that he visited Bai Ning that day, but he was depressed and unable to calm down. He also wanted to enter the civil officials list, but it was a delusion. When Bai Ning took out good wine to entertain him, Wei Xi drank a lot out of depression and did not understand what Bai Ning said. But now he dreamed of it. In the dream he was muddle-headed, but he heard it clearly. Like a sudden clap of thunder, the scattered clues gradually pieced together. His Majesty, Wei Xi was shocked and suddenly opened his eyes. The dazzling sunlight hurt his eyes. He subconsciously turned his head to avoid it, and it took him a long time to adapt. When he regained consciousness, Wei Xi realized that he was breaking out in a cold sweat. Everything in the dream became clearer. He thought he understood His Majesty very well, understood the current lord very well. But when he thought back to the dream, Wei Xi found it hard to believe that what he understood might only be the tip of the iceberg. In the previous life, His Majesty had already started to plot. She was playing a very, very big game of chess, but he had no idea. At the same time, Jiang Pingji opened her eyes and withdrew her mental strength from the yin and yang jade pendant in time. She supported her chin with her left hand and twirled the brush with her right. She muttered, "Bai Ning? Which little demon is this?" Just as she was thinking, a messenger came from outside the tent. "Report, an urgent secret report from the front lines." "Come in." Jiang Pingji restrained her unnecessary thoughts. The messenger hurriedly entered the tent and handed over a sealed bamboo tube. She casually pinched the bamboo tube and broke it, taking out the secret letter inside. Wei Xi had gone to Nanxing on a business trip, but Su Bei would not stop fighting because of this. Regardless of whether it was Su Bei or her, both sides were on the brink of life and death. The two families did not erupt into a large-scale war, only small skirmishes. For example, when they attacked a small district, you retreated and I advanced, I retreated and you advanced. Gentle was like flirting. Jiang Pingji knew what Su Bei was waiting for. He was waiting for Huang Song to send troops. She was also waiting for Wei Xi's news, waiting for Huang Song to enter the fray. If she did not press Huang Song and Su Bei to the ground and rub against them, she would feel sorry for Zixiao's hard work these few days. Sigh, they've become thinner and darker. Staring at Huang Song's secret letter, Jiang Pingji sighed. Chapter 1161. It's my honor to run errands for my lord. It's not hard at all. The messenger was overjoyed. He spoke his mind honestly. This time it was Jiang Pingji's turn to be confused. What did he mean? Before Jiang Pingji said anything, the audience in the streaming room reacted first. Demon King Yanlin, this messenger boy is a little cute. Streamer, do a good deed and don't shatter his sweet dreams. Xiao, let this beautiful misunderstanding continue. It's a pity to shatter it. Yao Yun, poor boy. Shenyuan Mingjing, the messenger boy's mental state at this moment should be like this. Why does my lord suddenly care about me? Could it be that she's secretly in love with me because of my good looks? But I still want to build a career and protect my descendants. If my lord takes a fancy to me, won't I marry into her family? What should I do? What should I do? Shouldn't I express that I'm a little tight? Xinjia, wrong. The young boy's mental state at this moment should be like this. Come on, my lord, don't pity this delicate flower. A group of toxic onlookers gathered together and created hilarious jokes all the time. Even if Jiang Pingji was mentally strong, she had to admit that they were talented. Streamer V. Qinduxiu, do you want me to buy you 2 bottles of Dihuaxiu, plant a few orange trees and build a few train stations? Although Jiang Pingji and the idol viewers lived in a different era by thousands of years, she was someone who kept up with the trends. She could learn and apply the jokes and memes that the audience created on the screen after little pondering. She knew all about the Italian canon of the 2nd Battalion commander, Qin Duxiu and Li Dezhao, Dihua Xiu hand sanitizer, god of creation, train stations and orange trees. But Jiang Pingji still underestimated the shamelessness of the idol. As soon as she spoke, the screen was filled with bullet screens of yes, 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 and front row screenshot and photo with the streamer. It was spectacular. Jiang Pingji was not a streamer who liked to interact with the audience. She had only spoken a few times in the streaming room for so many years. There were busybodies on the internet who collected her speeches over the years and edited them into a book and published it. She couldn't imagine what kind of immoral things these salted fish wouldn't do. After going through thousands of thoughts in her mind, Jiang Pingji put away the secret letter with her usual expression. She said to the messenger with a gentle expression, "Secret military reports can determine the outcome of a battle. You have fulfilled your duty and delivered the news to both places in time. You have done a good job and deserve praise." The messenger could no longer maintain his calm expression and he thanked him happily. For many soldiers, if they could get a word of praise from their lord, it was far more joyous than being promoted or rewarded. His lord had said that he had become darker and thinner. It was obvious that she had paid attention to him and remembered him. It was as if he was stepping on cotton and he floated away happily. Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily. Her originally heavy mood brightened up with this little episode. Her mood brightened, but Huang Song and Su Bei were not so happy. Su Bei had thought that he could use the mother and son of the prostitute to turn the tables on Jiang Pingji. At the very least he could cripple Xianxia. Among the people in Jiang Pingji's tent, only Xianxia was most familiar with Shanghai and Zhou counties. If Xianxia was crippled, the pressure on Su Bei's side would be greatly alleviated. Unexpectedly, the secret weapon that Huang Song had sent did not achieve the desired effect. Xianxia had nothing to do with the prostitute and he was also not the father of the boy. He was not cuckolded. Under such circumstances he still tried to accuse Xianxia and forcefully blackmail him. That was too shameless and it went against the way of a gentleman. Not only did he not achieve his expectations, but he also had a belly full of anger. Naturally, Su Bei had to find an outlet to vent his anger. Needless to say, the mother and son were directly dealt with. As if this was not enough to vent his anger, Su Bei still wanted to demand an explanation from Huang Song. What secret weapon to deal with Xianxia? He had made a fool of himself in front of Xianxia. Su Bei scolded Huang Song. Although the content of the letter was worded elegantly, the hidden bitterness that assaulted one's face made one's teeth ache. She was exactly like a resentful wife who had not seen her husband for a year and a half. Qing Jing and the rest understood the cause and effect of the matter. They all frowned. Wenbin is working for Su Bei. How could he watch Su Bei do such a foolish thing? Regardless of whether the mother and son were real or not, only by revealing it at the critical moment could it achieve a fatal effect and not give Xianxia a chance to retaliate. What was the use of impatiently playing this card now? Instead it gave Xianxia time to react. In fact, Xianxia had cleanly brushed it off with a few words. The most important thing was, Yang Jingrong appears to be a person who does not reveal the mountain and does not reveal the water. In fact, he is meticulous and has the ability to see through the smallest details. The alliance between the two families is a secret. However, with Su Bei's actions, how could Yang Jingrong not guess the truth? I'm afraid that Lu Shi's side has already made sufficient preparations. If the enemy was prepared, how could a sneak attack achieve the desired effect? It was not without reason that Qing Jing said that Su Bei was too stupid. He had obtained a trump card and could not wait to show it off in front of the enemy. If this was not stupid, then what was? Qing Jing and Han Yu were from the same sect and knew each other very well. He did not believe that Han Yu could not see the trick behind it. Feng Ju frowned slightly. He had to admit that Qing Jing's words were reasonable. Although Su Bei has some flaws with the current situation, it's better to have another ally than to fight alone. Once Su Bei fell, the next one to be beaten would definitely be Huang Song, who asked Huang Song's territory to be next to Jiang Pingji's. Normal people could not stand their neighbors coveting them with a knife, let alone a feudal lord. If Su Bei was slightly stronger, Huang Song could wait for him and Jiang Pingji to fight until both sides were injured and then reap the benefits. However, they had overestimated Su Bei. Under such circumstances, only the Huang and Su families working together could create the safest situation. Only by getting rid of the most threatening enemy could the two families be at ease and slowly tear each other apart. At the same time, Wei Xiai arrived at his destination. The current Yang Tao was no longer a nobody watching the big shots fight for the world. He had also grown into a colossus in the eyes of others. His influence in Dongqing only covered half of Zhangzhou, but his territory in Nanxing included 1 province and 4 counties. Although it was not the richest and most populous place in Nanxing, it was enough for him to gain a foothold. In order to gain a foothold, Yang Tao even formed an alliance with Enchui to advance and retreat together. The situation in Nanxing was far more chaotic than in Dongqing. Not only were there internal strife between the feudal lords and aristocratic families, but there was also the plundering and invasion of the 4 factions of Nanman. Wei Xiai found out about the situation and sighed in disappointment. The Nanxing in front of him was both familiar and unfamiliar. As he asked someone to hand over the documents, he packed lightly and brought only a few guards with him. He prepared some meager gifts and went to look for Bai Ning. Bai Ning came from a humble background. His ancestors made firecrackers, so he had some assets. However, due to several generations of poor management, Bai Ning's business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Troubled times came again, and the 4 factions of Nanman led their troops to wreak havoc on the people and land of Nanxing. Bai Ning simply abandoned his family business and picked up weapons. He led the able-bodied men in the village to become volunteers and protect the old and young in the village. Bai Ning's business was not doing well, but he had a reputation as a chivalrous man. Wei Xiai did not know if Bai Ning had been recruited by other forces, so he could only try his luck. As soon as he arrived in Pingjun, Wei Xiai knew that this trip might be fruitful. Chapter 1162. We've already eaten and drunk. Old man, you should get to work. Bai Ning was shirtless with his trousers rolled up. He grabbed a handful of fodder and stuffed it into the mule's mouth. The mule turned its face away in disgust. The weather was hot and the air was filled with impatience. Bai Ning was not a patient person. He tried to persuade the mule, but the mule still refused to carry its food. His temper flared up. You beast, could it be that you want to be skinned and your bones pulled out to be roasted as donkey meat? Bai Ning threatened the mule. The mule was still indifferent. He rolled his eyes and snorted coldly. He twisted his body and pointed his butt at Bai Ning. Bai Ning was about to get angry when Wei Xiai stepped forward with a smile. Are you Hero Bai? Bai Ning heard someone calling him. He temporarily put aside the idea of arguing with the mule and turned to look at the person. It's rare to see such a delicate person in this world. Bai Ning threw away the fodder in his hand, stroked the beard on his face and cracked a smile. Judging from your accent, you don't sound like a local and you don't look like someone who was robbed by bandits to seek justice. Bai Ning was 39 years old. He was considered to be in his prime. His exposed chest was strong and firm and there was a layer of sweat on his surface. Wei Xiai calmly stopped the guards who were about to step forward. He looked at Bai Ning with a smile. I'm indeed a foreigner. I heard that Hero Bai had settled down here, so I prepared a small gift and came to visit. If I've offended you in any way, I hope you can forgive me. Bai Ning felt uncomfortable when he heard this. He was an uncouth man. The neighbors he came in contact with were also uncouth. He rarely interacted with scholars. He saw that Wei Xi's clothes were neat and tidy, but he was bare-chested. His thick pants were tied at his waist with a hemp rope. However, Bai Ning was also a thick-skinned person. His bronze-colored skin did not show the slightest bit of embarrassment. Oh, so you're looking for me? Bai Ning looked at Wei Xiai with a faint smile, sizing him up from his feet to his head. His eyes flashed with satisfaction. Bai Ning casually pulled over a bench, sat down, crossed his long legs and looked like a rascal. He patted the other corner of the bench with his right hand. Don't beat around the bush, just say what you want to say. Come, young lad, sit down and talk. When Wei Xiai saw this familiar scene, he could not help but secretly laugh. Bai Ning had done the same thing in his previous life. At that time, Wei Xiai felt that this person was rude and disgraceful, but due to his upbringing he did not say anything. Not only did he not feel offended by meeting an old friend in this life, he even found it a little interesting. Moreover, Bai Ning was 39 this year. He was much older than Wei Xiai and could barely be considered as part of his father's generation. It would be impolite to refuse. It was Bai Ning's turn to feel uncomfortable. Bai Ning's temperament was like this. If you were unreasonable to him, he would be even more unreasonable. If you were to soften, he wouldn't be able to be unreasonable at all. Tell me the truth. What are you doing in a remote and desolate place? Wei Xi smiled and said, didn't I say it just now? Xi has specially come to look for Hero Bai. Bai Ning didn't believe this. Outsiders called him Hero Bai because he led the youths in the countryside to repel the bandits and maintain the peace of the region, earning himself a good reputation. Bai Ning knew that this could only be regarded as a small quarrel. How could it provoke a gentleman like Wei Xi in front of him? Then why are you looking for me? Bai Ning looked at Wei Xi's appearance and then thought of his own. Bai Ning, who had always been casual and sloppy, felt goosebumps all over his body. Wei Xi said, of course it's to recruit Hero Bai so that a bright pearl will not be covered in dust. Bai Ning was startled and couldn't help but pick his ear with his little finger. What did you say? A bright pearl will be covered in dust? Has the brain of this fool in front of him been cracked open? I'm just a boorish man. I only have strength but no other skills. Bai Ning rubbed his hands awkwardly and stood up suddenly. He grabbed the reins hanging on the mule and tightened his muscles all over his body. He looked rather frightened. You should find someone else for this matter. Hero Bai, why are you so modest? Wei Xi said, if you have no talent, how can you resist thousands of thugs with just a few hundred youths in the countryside? A few years ago the southern barbarians wreaked havoc and Ping County also fell under the tyranny of the barbarians. Only this place is still considered peaceful. Don't tell me that there aren't any heroes here? Heroes say that they have no talent and incompetence, but when it comes to arranging troops and formations, many old generals also sigh at their inferiority. When Wei Xi said this, Bai Ning was like a wild cat that had been provoked and his hair stood on end. There was a hint of fierceness in his eyes. Wei Xi continued, now that the world is in chaos, don't the heroes want to clear the Jade universe? Being content in a corner will only cause a bright pearl to be covered in dust. Bai Ning dragged the mule and roared anxiously. It's none of your business. Wei Xi followed closely and didn't force him. The poor mule still wanted to stay where it was, but Bai Ning's strength was too great. He could even lift a big cauldron of 3 or 4 stone at will, let alone this stubborn mule. The mule rubbed a long mark on the ground. In the end it couldn't bear it anymore and took the initiative to follow Wei Xi. Wei Xi followed Bai Ning all the way to his house. Bai Ning's ancestors sold firecrackers and could barely be considered well off. Unfortunately, the past 2 generations were not good at managing the business. Bai Ning was already very poor and could barely make ends meet. In order to support his family, Bai Ning often went hunting in the mountains and earned more money than selling firecrackers. After Wei Xi recruited Bai Ning in his previous life, he heard him talk about his youth. When Bai Ning was young, he saved a crippled old general who had become a beggar. His martial arts and military tactics were all taught by the general. Bai Ning was not successful in business, but he was very talented in martial arts, far more outstanding than the old general. However, Bai Ning came from a humble background and was worried about his old parents at home, so he never joined the army. This dragged on until he was middle-aged and the world was in chaos. This is my house, get out. When Bai Ning saw Wei Xi following him, he grabbed the fence of his house and used his sturdy body to block the way. Wei Xi laughed. Yi observed the stars and calculated with his fingers. I found out that Hero Bai's teacher is the former tiger general of Nanxing, Guchun. Is that true? Bai Ning's expression froze and his large eyes widened. That's not true. I don't know any Guchun or Wuxia. Hero Bai, don't be anxious. Nanxing has already been destroyed. Even if the matter of General Guchun is known, it won't bring Hero Bai a fatal disaster. Guchun. This was what Wei Xi deduced after careful research in his previous life and was later confirmed by Bai Ning. During the last years of Nanxing, the army was conscripted to suppress the 4 factions of Nanman. The Tiger General Guchun made many contributions. Guchun was loyal to the emperor and had a straightforward and unyielding character. He offended many nobles and aristocratic families. The latter were afraid that Guchun would win in the crusade against Nanman, so they decided to strike first and delay the reinforcements and supplies. Guchun was ambushed by the 4 factions of Nanman. The battle report said that he died in battle and his corpse was eaten by the war beasts raised by the 4 factions of Nanman. Later he was convicted by the court of a groundless crime and implicated his family. Chapter 1163. What are you waiting for? Get straight to the point. What do you want? Bai Ning was so anxious that he didn't even speak Ye Yen. Instead, he used Pingjuan's dialect. After he finished speaking, his face revealed an awkward expression. Bai Ning repeated each word in Yan. Child, if you have something to say, just say it. What do you want? Wei Xi had a faint smile on his face as if he didn't see Bai Ning losing his composure. I'm sincerely inviting Hero Bai to come out of retirement. It's a pity that your talents are buried in the countryside. Bai Ning said again, Are you bullying me because I'm not well educated? You liar. Go away or I'll beat you up. Wei Xi was surprised. In his previous life, Bai Ning was also very resistant to coming out of retirement, but not as strongly as he was now. Lying to die? Wei Xi laughed. I'm sincerely inviting you without any deceit. Bai Ning's face was fierce. He had an expression that said, I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen, I just don't want to listen. Wei Xi had no choice but to use his killer move. How about this? I'll make a bet with you. If I win, Hero Bai, why don't you consider becoming an official? Bai Ning raised his eyebrows. His raised beard swayed in the air. He said in a rough voice, What about you if you lose? Wei Xi said, I'll be at your disposal. Bai Ning clapped his hands and let go of the fence gate. He rubbed his palms excitedly. That's good. Then don't go back on your word. There's only one thing. I won't marry a wife, take a concubine, or marry into your family. As soon as Wei Xi said this, Bai Ning's excited expression stiffened, revealing an expression as if he had seen a ghost. Wei Xi smiled and said, Although I don't have a wife or children, my heart belongs to someone. I'm afraid that Hero Bai's plan will fail. Bai Ning's voice changed. How do you know? Wei Xi said, I just said it. I observed the stars at night and calculated with my fingers. I know the big and small matters of the past 30 years. I'm not lying. In fact, Bai Ning had proposed marriage to Wei Xi in his previous life. Bai Ning had a daughter who was extremely ugly. She was over 23 years old and was still unmarried. She had been a virgin for a long time, but she was still unmarried. If it weren't for Bai Ning's protection in the countryside, the villagers would have been indebted to him. Otherwise, the rumors and slanders would have killed his daughter. In Wei Xi's previous life, Bai Ning's recruitment was delayed by 1 or 2 years. At that time his daughter was not married yet, let alone in this life. What else do you know? I know a little. Wei Xi said, the content of the bet is simple. I will randomly calculate 2 things. If they are accurate, I will win. How about that? Bai Ning felt guilty, but Wei Xi did not look like a fortune teller who set up a stall on the streets. 15 minutes later, who is your lord? Bai Ning was also depressed. He was just a rough man from the countryside. How could he have imagined that there would be an immortal-like gentleman who would come to recruit him? Moreover, he even acted as if he was determined to win. Since when did he become so popular? Wei Xi smiled and said, My master is Lord Lanting of Dongqing, the governor of Wanzhou. My lord dispatched Ci Nan to discuss the matter of forming an alliance with Yang Tao. Ci Bandao heard of righteous Hero Bai's heroic act of protecting the village and was filled with admiration. Thus he searched for you several times and personally came to invite you. Bai Ning was stunned. From Dongqing? Wei Xi knew what he was hesitating about. Righteous Hero Bai Pingjun is the site of 3 wars. It won't be peaceful for long. If you insist on staying here, the safety of your family will be difficult to guarantee. As far as Wei Xi knew, it was not that Bai Ning had never thought of becoming an official. However, he was already old. Almost 40 years old was considered old in the ranks of military generals. Moreover, he was of low birth. If he joined the army, he could only be a low-ranking soldier. He was almost the most worthless cannon fodder on the battlefield. Even if he had the courage to kill the enemy, the barracks could not even provide weapons and armor. Who could he kill? It was very difficult for a low-ranking soldier to climb up. Every step was made by piling up the enemy's heads. Bai Ning was an old man and had almost no chance of making a name for himself. Instead of that, he might as well stay in Pingjun and lead the village soldiers to fight the bandits. It was not that Bai Ning did not understand. Since the fall of Nanxing, Pingjun had changed more than 20 masters in a few years. There were fewer young adults and it was more difficult to survive. However, Bai Ning did not want to leave his hometown and run to another country. Let me think again. Although the bet did not force Bai Ning to join, Wei Xi's calculations were accurate. Bai Ning had to be cautious. In this world that did not believe in science, a quack like Wuxia was quite popular. This was made by your daughter? Wuxia looked at the crossbow placed on the wooden shelf in the room and took it down to play with it. What a clever idea. Bai Ning said proudly, of course it was made by our Xia. It's the best in the surrounding area. Wuxia was not surprised by Bai Ning's performance. There were many reasons why Bai Yuexia had been dragged from a virgin to an old unmarried woman, not just because of her appearance. Although she was ugly, she was smart and quick-witted since she was a child. She could learn anything with just a little bit. It was said that she was even taught by the current generation of Mahists. She was very excellent in the art of mechanisms. She was really a woman with a clear mind. Because her appearance was not good, she wanted to find a husband who was talented in appearance but not limited to appearance. Apart from that, she had other high requirements. She scared off a group of suitors, but Bai Ning still indulged her. With Bai Ning supporting her, Bai Yuexia did not have to worry about when she would get married. Just as they were talking, a clear female voice came from outside. Father, there's a guest at home? Wuxia looked over and saw a plainly dressed woman push open the door and enter. She looked mature, but her hair was tied up in a bun like an unmarried woman. Bai Yuexia's appearance took after her father. Her facial features tended to be strong, and the lines of her face were not as soft as ordinary women. At first glance one would think that she was a man. Her eyebrows were thick and thick, her eyes were dark and bright, and her skin was a little dark yellow and rough. If that was all, she would not be called ugly. However, there was a huge purple-brown birthmark on her face, which occupied most of her face. She looked as ferocious as a malicious spirit. Seeing that there was an immortal-like beauty in the house, Bai Yuexia could not help but take a few more glances. Wuxi's expression was calm. He was not frightened by her appearance at all, and there was no look of contempt in his eyes. This made Bai Yuexia unable to help but take a few more glances. This is a distinguished guest from Dongqing. Xia, go and make a pot of tea for the guest. Bai Yuexia bowed slightly and did as she was told. I wonder what brings this esteemed guest to my humble abode. Bai Ning said, he's here to persuade me to become an official, but I haven't decided yet. I want to hear Xia's opinion. A distinguished guest from Dongqing? Become an official? Bai Yuexia's hand that was making tea paused. She asked hesitantly, Sir, are you working for Lord Lanting? Bai Ning said, Yes, that's what he said. Wuxia laughed. Bai Nyangzi is very intelligent. He guessed correctly. There are only a few families in Dongqing. I was just guessing randomly. Bai Yuexia showed a rare look of embarrassment. She lowered her head shyly and said softly, I have also guessed others, but among the many families in Dongqing, only Lord Lanting does not care about family background and only uses talent. Bai Ning's family background was very low, but Wuxia personally came to invite him. It seemed that only Jiang Pingji could do so. Bai Ning looked at his daughter as if he had seen a ghost. This shy little girl in front of him was really his daughter? Wuxia was speechless. Wait. Chapter 1164. In his previous life he and Bai Yuexia had not interacted much, but he knew that Bai Yuexia had a mysterious love and closeness for His Majesty. The way Bai Yuexia looked at His Majesty always made him unhappy. Now that he thought about it, that gaze contained not only reverence and worship but also a deeper meaning. Wuxi's expression did not change, but his heart was in turmoil. Bai Ning laughed. Apart from her looks, Xia is good in everything. She's worthy of the best man in the world. After saying that, Bai Ning signaled Wuxia with his eyes. Should he change his mind and marry his daughter? Wuxia smiled awkwardly and said, Hero Bai is right. Lady Bai will definitely find the best husband in the future. If it was in the past, Wuxia would definitely not be worried. Ever since he found out about his lord's background, he was a little confused. The lord's background was mysterious. She must have been very open-minded in her previous life, so she regarded men as normal. Then, Wuxia could not help but let his imagination run wild. It was normal for men to be attracted to men, so was it normal for women to be attracted to men? When he thought of this, he felt the pressure on his shoulders suddenly increase. Opening the door to a new world, Wuxia turned his head and recalled again. He realized that he was surrounded by rivals in love. Among the many rivals in love, Bai Yuexia was the most threatening one. If they were to fight, Wuxia felt that he could not defeat her. In her previous life, Bai Yuexia was a very low-key woman. However, no matter how low-key she was, it couldn't conceal the fact that she stood in the imperial court as a woman. She was the Minister of Works. A few years later, she paid her respects to the Prime Minister at the Golden Unicorn platform. Before she retired, she even sent her portrait to the Heavenly Craftsman ranking of the Golden Scale Pavilion. Just from the Golden Scale Pavilion's 3 lists of civil, martial and heavenly works, Wei Ci, who did not even have a ranking in his previous life, was under immense pressure. After that, His Majesty proposed the policy of 1 family, 2 households, and Bai Yuexia was the first one in the court to stand up and support it. In comparison, Wei Ci was apprehensive of the power in the imperial court and reacted a beat slower, unlike Bai Yuexia who staked everything on one throw. What was 1 door, 2 households? To put it bluntly, a family was allowed to have 2 heads of household. Children born to a woman could inherit both the family property of their mother and the family property of their father. The children's surname and household registration could be decided through consultation. Many officials thought that this policy was specially established to ensure that the Empress would continue to exist for a long time. At the beginning of the proposal, almost no one objected. If they were to oppose the 1 family, 2 households policy, wouldn't they be supporting the Empress in a disguised form? Just like ordinary women and children who married their husbands, wouldn't they? This was not nonsense. Whoever objected would have their brains filled with seawater. However, this was only the opinion of a mediocre person. Wei Ci was very clear that the 1 family with 2 households was actually to support the female household system. After the establishment of the Jiang dynasty, the world was at peace and there were fewer and fewer women who set up their own households. In some places there was even a culture of despising women. It wasn't that the women didn't want to establish a female household, it was just that there were too few good men who were willing to marry into the family, and the pressure of establishing a female household was too great. Many women could only choose to compromise. Even if they got married and earned more money, their income could only be regarded as supporting the family and not supporting the family. In order to solve this problem, His Majesty proposed to have 2 heads of household and set up a series of new marriage laws. From the start of the new law, Jiang Chao had a clear concept of joint property after marriage. Of course, concubines and children born of concubines were not considered joint property. Their daily expenses and future marriage residences were only managed by the man. This made the majority of legal wives applaud and feel even more grateful to His Majesty. One had to know that before this system was introduced, many legal wives not only had to help their husbands take care of the family property, but they also had to manage the daily expenses and various trivial matters of the concubines and children born of concubines. When faced with a husband who favored his concubines to the detriment of his wife, the legal wives couldn't even defend the interests of themselves and their children. Although the 1 family with 2 households was to protect the continuation of the Empress, they were also beneficiaries of the new law. At first, Jiang Chaomen didn't care about this new law. Anyway, they didn't covet their wives' money. Even if there were people who coveted their wives' dowry, who would have the face to say it? There was nothing wrong with the imperial court promulgating laws to protect the Empress, the royal family, and the legitimate children of the legal wife. However, not long after, many men started to complain. They couldn't stand this kind of grievance. There was a story that left a deep impression on Wei Ci. An official paid a high monthly salary to hire the legal wife to take care of the children born of concubines and a house full of concubines. That's right, the husband paid the legal wife to help take care of the concubines and children born of concubines. The laws of the Jiang Chao dynasty stipulated that concubines couldn't touch the authority of a housekeeper. It was fine among the people. If it was discovered that a concubine had taken over the authority of the legal wife, it would at most cause a bad reputation. If an imperial court official was found to have a concubine touch the authority of a housekeeper, he would be demoted or even dismissed. Cultivating one's moral character, managing one's family, governing the country and bringing peace to the world. If even the house was in a mess, how could one be an official if one didn't understand the orthodoxy? If the legal wife didn't care about the concubines and children born of concubines, then the husband could only take care of them himself. During the day he would go out to earn money and work. At night he would come back to settle accounts and take care of the concubines' rouge, cosmetics and cloth materials. The men couldn't take it anymore. Many court officials took advantage of this to make things difficult for them. Since ancient times, Men took care of external affairs while women took care of internal affairs. Concubines and children born of concubines were also the responsibility of the legal wife. In the end, they were ruthlessly beaten down by the Empress and the aristocratic families, and soon there was no more movement. The Xianxia dynasty was newly established. Those who took in a bunch of concubines were mostly the new nobility or poor families who had gained power. Once they gained power, they became arrogant. There were many poor families who drove out their first wives or neglected their wives, and took in beautiful concubines. The aristocratic families had a long history. They had always claimed to be supporters of orthodoxy, and there were also strict rules for taking in concubines. For them, the loss of the new policy was not big. On the contrary, the poor families and the new nobility were angry. The aristocratic families took this opportunity to stand on the Empress's side to suppress the poor families. As the leader of the female officials, Wuxia was the direction and role model for all the women to work hard. She carried out the new policy and played a good role in leading the way. She had a son and a daughter. The son followed his husband and the daughter followed her. Wuxia's son was not capable, but her daughter was different. She became the crown princess Zhang Yan's most trusted confidant. From a rational point of view, Wuxia admired Wuxia very much. When the world despised women, she reached such a high position that it was difficult for others to catch up to her. From an emotional point of view, Wuxia really couldn't force himself to like Wuxia. It was good enough that he didn't treat her as a love rival. But if he could go back in time, he would still come to recruit Bai Ning. After all, the Lord's interests were the most important. Love was just a small matter. From what you said, Lady Bai admires my lord very much. Wuxia smiled warmly like a quietly blooming spring flower, bright and warm. Wuxia spoke quickly. The world treats women so unfairly, but the Duke of Lanting still walked to a point where no one can catch up to him. Isn't he a role model for all the women in the world? I've admired him for a long time. In a moment of excitement, I made a fool of myself in front of the teacher. I'm indebted to the Duke of Lanting for not abandoning me. If father can become an official and work for him, pacifying the world and clearing the Jade World, it will be a blessing for us father and daughter. Wuxia was speechless. I only want to recruit your father. I didn't include you. Chapter 1165. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't upset. Wuxia recalled many things from the past, such as the details of how he recruited Bai Ning in his previous life. In his previous life, he had tried to recruit Bai Ning on behalf of his lord, Chui. At that time he was poor and had only a few generals under him. And Chui did not have the right to look down on talent, so he recruited whoever he could. Although Bai Ning was old, he was still vigorous and could be considered a fierce general. An old steed in the stable had great ambitions. An old general who was almost 40 years old could not be underestimated. It wasn't difficult to recruit Bai Ning, but he had run into a snag with Wuxia. She had even ridiculed his master Chui in a neither soft nor hard way. However, Chui was slightly cold and powerless at the time. Wuxia's harsh words were the truth, so he couldn't act up in front of Bai Ning. Recalling his past life and comparing it to this life, Wuxia almost vomited blood. In his past life, he had to persuade Bai Ning to become an official after much persuasion. Wuxia ridiculed him, but he still had to maintain a polite smile. In this life, Wuxia used her lord's name. Without a second word, she packed her father and herself into officialdom. It was obviously going so smoothly. Why was Wuxia so unwilling? How infuriating. Since they had decided to become officials, Bai Ning and his daughter had to pack up their belongings and leave with Wuxia. Wuxia could use this time to persuade Yang Tao to form an alliance and send troops. Bai Ning was still in a daze even after Wuxia left. Xia, do you really want to go to Dongqing? That place is far away from home. Father might not be able to protect you. Bai Ning drank the bitter sake and mumbled, I wanted to find a good family for you, but if you leave Pingjun, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Wuxia was swiftly packing up her belongings. After the war, you can come back whenever you want. Wuxia said, as for your daughter's marriage, you don't have to worry about it. They were just a bunch of boorish men who could only be seen by their appearance. To put it bluntly, they were nothing more than trash. I don't care for those with embroidered pillows. If I were to marry, it must be a man of great stature like the Duke of Lanting. I don't want to make do with just anyone. Bai Ning became even more worried, his thick black brows knitted into a knot. Xia, the Duke of Lanting is a woman. That's why I'm looking for a man as capable as him. I'm not marrying the Duke of Lanting. Bai Yuexia looked at her father. What kind of tricks did he have in his mind? She's the role model of our generation of women. If we could live happily like her, how carefree would that be? Bai Yuexia really admired Jiang Pingji and became her die-hard fan in no time. She was a woman who was despised and criticized because of her appearance. How much had Bai Yuexia suffered and how many tears had she shed because of this face? It would have been fine if she was stupid, but she was slow in perceiving the malice of others. Naturally, she would not be hurt by it. However, she was extremely intelligent and couldn't turn a blind eye to it. Why couldn't her intelligence and talent win the recognition and love of others? This question perplexed her for many years. Only later did she realize that it was because she was ugly. For a woman, being ugly was an original sin. She could forget about getting anyone's attention in this lifetime. According to the rites of Zhou, a woman has 4 virtues. Virtue is speech and appearance. She thought that except for her lack of appearance, she had the other 3 virtues. Unfortunately, she still couldn't compare to those illiterate, vulgar, and even unfilial shrews in the countryside. Because they were good-looking and could give birth, they were considered perfect as a woman. How unfair was that? Although Bai Yuexia didn't show it, she had suppressed her feelings for many years. She had tried every possible way to reject the marriage that Bai Ning had proposed for her. Those men were just ordinary people. As soon as they saw her face, their eyes honestly reflected what they were thinking in their hearts. Disgust and contempt. Bai Yuexia was proud and arrogant. How could she tolerate herself groveling to someone who was inferior to her in every aspect? Once she groveled, her pride and dignity would be broken. It wasn't until after the Huangshui meeting that Jiang Pingji's identity as a woman was revealed. Everyone in the world knew that Lu Shi was a woman and not a man. The moment she heard the news, Bai Yuexia was like a lone traveler in the dark who finally saw a bright light. It was dazzling and dazzling, hanging high in the sky. That kind of joy and excitement couldn't be understood by others. That was her son. At that moment she really wanted to turn into Kuafu and chase after it until she died. Bai Ning didn't know what his daughter was thinking. He felt very ashamed. His old parents and wife had already turned to dust. Other than his daughter, he was all alone in the world. It was his fault that he wasn't able to let his daughter live a good life. Bai Ning watched his daughter pack up the pieces of wood on the shelves and asked, "Are we taking these away too?" "Of course. They might be useful in the future." Bai Yuexia nimbly packed them into the boxes. The wooden materials on the shelves in the house were all gadgets that she had made. There were 6 big boxes in total. "I heard that Zixia wants to persuade Yang Tao to mobilize his troops. What do you think is the possibility of this happening?" Bai Ning couldn't help, so he tried to find a topic to chat about. 50-50, I think. Bai Yuexia said uncertainly. Yang Tao and Su Bei have a feud of half a province. Zhangzhou was seized. How could Yang Tao tolerate this? However, I see that Wei Zixiao is very confident. I'm afraid he has other bargaining chips that will allow him to easily persuade the other party. Bai Ning had also heard about the situation in Dongqing, but he didn't know as much as his daughter, who was chasing after her idol. He said, "When I have a firm foothold in Lord Lanting's camp, I will definitely find you a husband who is both talented and charming." Bai Yuexia's expression didn't change. She knew that her father was worried that if something happened to him, she would be lonely and have no one to rely on. Therefore, he wanted to create a small family for her so that she would have a foothold. However, she was already indifferent to marriage. As for a husband, she would leave it to fate. Bai Ning and his daughter waited for 2 days. That afternoon, a group of soldiers with extraordinary auras stood outside the house. After asking around, they found out that Wei Xi had already convinced Yang Tao to form an alliance. Wei Xi had asked Yang Tao to send someone to fetch the father and daughter. "How did you convince Yang Tao?" Bai Yuexia was astonished. Yang Tao's father's murderer Zhou Xian is under Su Bei's camp. Wei Xi smiled and said, "Yang Tao lost half of Zhangzhou to Su Bei. He can't tolerate this. Moreover, if he waits for my lord to pacify the Huang and Su families, he won't be able to keep his half of Zhangzhou." No matter how well Yang Tao developed in Nanxing, his roots were in Dongqing. If he didn't seize this opportunity to return to Dongqing and gain a firm foothold, Dongqing would be her world after Jiang Pingji destroyed the Huang and Su families. Bai Yuexia's eyes lit up, but she said, I heard that the Huang and Su families are powerful. Since the war at the northern borderline, the Duke of Lanting has been exhausted from fighting for a long time. Now that he's mobilized his troops against the two families, I wonder what his chances of winning are. It's not that my lord is belligerent. It's obvious that others aren't willing to lay down their butcher's knives. She has no choice but to fight, he said. The chances of winning are not high. 100% is enough. If not for the Nye family of Zhongzhao's temporary withdrawal from the scene and the Yi family of Beiyuan's domestic politics, Jiang Pingji would have to face the predicament of fighting on all sides. Now that it was 1 against 2, the difficulty was very low. Now that she had joined forces with Yang Tao, they still couldn't win 2 against 2. It was better to rest early. Bai Yuexiao pursed her lips, her smile rippling. I heard that the Duke of Lanting wrote to Su Bei and said, I want 100% of the 9 provinces and 4 seas. Why was her lord so arrogant and likable? Wei Xi was speechless. Chapter 1166. Even though Wei Xi spent 2 days to convince Yang Tao to form an alliance, the entire process was not smooth sailing. Instead, it was full of twists and turns. Yang Tao was in the pro-war faction, but his subordinates were not interested in it. If it weren't for Yan Lin's support, Yang Tao wouldn't have been able to suppress all the opposing voices and form an alliance. Yang Tao's old subordinates were brought over from Dongqing, but after they took root in Nanxing, the talents they recruited were all locals of Nanxing. He was able to gain a foothold in Nanxing not only because of his old subordinates, but also because of the Nanxing family. As mentioned before, the aristocratic families occupied more than 60% of the world's wealth. The longer the inheritance, the richer the family's wealth. If they lacked manpower, they would send manpower. If they lacked money, they would send money. If they lacked soldiers, they would buy soldiers. There was nothing in this world that money couldn't buy. If there was something, it was definitely not enough. Yang Tao accepted the olive branch extended by the aristocratic families and received their generosity. Only then did he have the confidence to send troops to start his own empire. Since he had received benefits from them, he naturally had to give them something in return. After all, not everyone was like Jiang Pingji. She could forcefully reject the aristocratic families, but others did not have the confidence to do so. Even for Jiang Pingji, there was a certain element of luck in her success. During the earthquake in Shangjing, there were countless casualties and refugees everywhere. The royal family of Dongqing disregarded the lives of the people and forcefully moved the capital. The Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group took advantage of the situation to rise. Jiang Pingji seized the opportunity to stand up and become the backbone of the people of Wanzhou. They recruited soldiers and bought horses, absorbed young and strong refugees to strengthen themselves, and accumulated primitive capital by harming the northern borderline. At the same time, they mobilized troops to suppress the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group and plundered their assets. Her success is almost impossible to replicate. The right time, the right place, and the right people were indispensable. When Wei Xi came forward to persuade them to form an alliance, the officials under Yang Tao who were from aristocratic families were unwilling. They wanted to set their sights on Nanxing. He would unify Nanxing and make himself the emperor. What benefits could Yang Tao reap by crossing over to fight Su Bei and Huang Song? This battle was won, and the person who benefited the most was Jiang Pingji. Huang Song's and Su Bei's territories had all been taken over by her. If Yang Tao went to war, he would only be able to take back half of Zhangzhou at most. Dongqing had 6 prefectures and 21 counties. Among them, 5 prefectures and 19 counties were under Jiang Pingji's control. With the addition of the northern borderline, the territory under her rule was larger than the original Dongqing. It was more than enough for her to establish a country and ascend the throne. What's the point of Yang Tao only taking Zhangzhou? Don't be fooled by the fact that the children of aristocratic families looked like they were above the common people, but when it came to accounting, they were very shrewd. Wei Xi was put in a difficult position, but this was nothing to him. He knew 80% of these officials who were from Nanxing aristocratic families. Back when Chui returned to Nanxing to develop, he was penniless. In order to obtain the help of these aristocratic families, Wei Xi had put in a lot of effort. Even after so many years had passed, Wei Xi still remembered the situation of each family and their connections. He had not been afraid in his previous life, so how could he be afraid in this life? In the words of his lord, none of these landowning households could fight. Trying to persuade these people rather than using extravagant promises, It was better to say one or two words that were concerned about their own interests. Although the opposition from the aristocratic families was loud, the final decision-maker was still made by Yang Tao. Yang Tao wasn't stupid. Even though he had borrowed the power of the aristocratic families, he wouldn't be turned into a puppet by the other party. Even if Yang Tao couldn't make it, he still had Yan Lin to protect his father. Military advisor, can't you persuade the Lord to give up on the idea of forming an alliance? Yan Lin said, the Lord has already made up her mind. There's no point in trying to persuade her. Putting aside the hatred of killing his father and seizing the state, Yan Lin didn't approve of Yang Tao and Jiang Pingji forming an alliance. The reason could be summed up in 4 words: asking a tiger for its skin. During the alliance meeting at Huangshui, Yan Lin felt that Jiang Pingji was full of ambition. This person's appetite would never be satisfied with Dongqing or the northern borderline. If the Lord allied with her to kill Su Bei and Huang Song, Yan Lin deeply suspected that she would turn around and stab Yang Tao. This woman had done many things to kill her acquaintances. The official said, "Sai, if we send troops to attack Huang Song and Su Bei, our supply lines will definitely be tight. If we're not careful, we'll be doomed eternally." This official wasn't exaggerating. He was sincerely considering things for Yang Tao. In his opinion, a man had to be ruthless if he wanted to achieve great things. If Yang Tao rashly sent troops to fight a foreign war to avenge his father, he would suffer greatly. It was better to swallow this hatred. If Xiao Xiao fell into Jiang Pingji's hands, he would die anyway. Haven't the Lord thought about your concerns? Yan Lin frowned and let out a long sigh. But, you've only seen the current situation in Nanxing. You haven't considered the situation in the world. Lu Shi is a person with great ambitions. She won't be satisfied with Dongqing or the northern borderline. After she unifies Dongqing, she'll have a year or 2 to cultivate. Nanxing will be her next target. Zhangzhou must not be lost. Without Zhangzhou as the front line, Jiang Pingji could send troops to the border after unifying Dongqing. By then Yang Tao would be in a dangerous situation. When the official heard this, his expression changed drastically. After a while he said, Lu Shi is just a woman. How can she be so ambitious? Yan Lin didn't speak. What did ambition have to do with whether she was a woman or not? Or perhaps, in many people's minds, Jiang Pingji should be satisfied with conquering Dongqing? Yan Lin said indifferently, the northern borderline has been destroyed for almost a year. She had even destroyed the northern borderline. Why did people always think that she was a woman who could be easily fooled? If all the women in the backyard behaved like her, there would be no place for men in the world. The official looked embarrassed. After a while he took his leave. Yan Lin said to the back hall, My lord, come out. Yang Tao poked his head out to take a look at the enemy situation. Seeing that the official had really left, he felt relieved and came out. Xiaoyang, you don't agree with the alliance either? The pros and cons are equal. It's all up to my lord. From Yan Lin's point of view, it didn't matter which side he chose. But since Yang Tao wanted to fight, he could only support him. Yang Tao said, I once swore in front of my father's coffin that I would kill Zhao Xiao with my own hands. Now that Zhao Xiao has sided with Su Bei and Su Bei has taken half of my state, we have to settle the score no matter what. Moreover, if we can take back Zhangzhou, we can use it as an outpost to restrain Lu Shi. The first 2 sentences were from Yang Tao's heart. The last sentence was plagiarizing Yan Lin's idea. Yan Lin didn't expose him. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, That's what I was thinking. Wei Ci was very efficient, but sending troops to war was different from other things. It required a certain amount of preparation time. Yang Tao's troops had yet to set off, but Jiang Pingji's side couldn't help but take the lead and break the stalemate. In the beginning they were just probing each other. Every time they fought there were only about 100 casualties. It was a small skirmish. It was the same principle as scratching an itch through one's boots. They couldn't really scratch the itch. Instead, the more they scratched, the more itchy it became. Su Bei could still keep his composure, but Jiang Pingji felt some pressure. If the supply line was too long, it would inevitably increase the logistical pressure. The cost of fighting a war would be even higher than that of the northern borderline. Huang Song and Su Bei secretly formed an alliance and secretly sent troops to war. As the saying goes, hit the snake where it hurts. If the supply line was tight, they would attack it first. Chapter 1167. The grain transportation line was a top secret, but there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. It was impossible to guard against the scouts and spies alone. Jiang Pingji was handling military affairs and inspecting the training of the troops. The messenger had something to report. What happened? She asked. The 50,000 dawn of grain transported from Xing City in Hu County was attacked. The messenger said with a heavy expression. Jiang Pingji crushed the pen in her hand. She didn't show any agitation, but her eyes turned cold. What do you mean? The grain transported from Xing City in Hu County was attacked? Jiang Pingji asked. Who attacked? The messenger didn't answer, but she had an idea. Su Bei's troops were almost all under her nose. The person who could attack the grain line without anyone noticing must be Huang Song. The messenger said, although the attacker didn't show his flag from the weapons we found, it should be Huang Song. The weapons were engraved with the surname Yuan, and a simple family emblem. The Yuan family was Huang Song's family. Jiang Pingji gritted her teeth in anger. It was too inconvenient to transmit information in ancient times. When she received the news that the grain team was attacked, Huang Song had gone home early. Do the military advisors know about this? Have you sent anyone to intercept them? Jiang Pingji knew that the 50,000 dawn of grain could not be kept, but those who came to steal the grain could not think about leaving. They had to stay alive. What are their arrangements? Jiang Pingji was overseeing the main army. These days she had been handling military affairs and calming people down. Xianxia and the others were at the front lines. Naturally, their reaction speed was much faster than hers. If they sent troops to intercept them in time, they might even be able to beat those thieves to the ground and send them to the King of Hell. The messenger said, military advisor Qiguan learned about this and has already sent troops to intercept them. Jiang Pingji trusted Qiguan Rang's ability. Since he had taken action, he would not let Huang Song leave unscathed. Even so, Jiang Pingji was so angry that her liver hurt. She had spent a lot of money to build the heavy cavalry battalion. Even if she recovered by plundering the nobles of the northern borderline, she still felt that she was poor. In troubled times, no matter how precious jewels and gold were, they were not as precious as grain. Although Hu County was a major grain-producing county with a large area of arable land, it was not easy for farmers to farm. Grain was planted, not conjured. Every grain was precious. She couldn't help but clench her fists at the thought of Huang Song stealing or burning 50,000 dawn of grain. The audience in the streaming room had been following Jiang Pingji for some years. Occasionally they could guess her mood from her expression and gaze. Needless to say, given the situation before him, she was definitely angry. Huahua loves pighead. Host, don't be angry. Our 850,000 salted fish army supports you. 50,000 dawn of grain is nothing. Each of us will give you some as a tip. When the time comes, you can exchange it for 1,000,000 dawn of grain. Eat one bowl and throw it away, cook one pot and throw it away. Let those poor bastards see the might of a nouveau riche. He wanted to let them know one thing: with money you can really do whatever you want. I'm not angry anymore. Judge Yu, well, let me ask a stupid question. Is 50,000 dawn of grain a lot? Jiang Pingji rarely got angry. Many of the audience had been following her novel for so many years, but until now, they had never seen any expression other than a calm or smiling expression on her face. Lao Siji Lianming, 50,000 dawn is a lot. If you guys have been following her updates since a long time ago, you should know that the host once did a show in Hejian County where she limited the purchase of grain to suppress the price of grain. At that time, the host didn't have much grain on her hands. She had to make a tight calculation and barely suppressed the price of ordinary grain in Hejian County. Think about it, how much is 50,000 dawn? If it falls into Huang Song's hands, he won't leave it for the host even if he burns it. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu. According to my observations over the years, one dawn in this world is about 50 kilograms. Let me calculate for you guys. If an adult eats 1 catty a day, then 10,000 people will eat 10,000 catties, which is equivalent to 5,000 kilograms, which is 100 dawn. With the intuitive numbers, the audience could not help but gasp. Tudu Feichio, that's not right. The cooks who transport the grain also need to eat. Their grain is also paid from the total amount of grain transported. Xianxia. But I remember that Xing City in Hu County is only 7 or 8 days' journey on foot from the front line. No matter how much the cooks can eat, how much can they eat? When the 50,000 dawn of grain is transported to the front line, there will definitely be a large portion left. Now that Huang Song has intercepted it, It would be strange if the host doesn't feel distressed. The audience was already used to the plot of television dramas. They thought that millions of dawn of grain could be easily taken out to fight a war. Little did they know that 50,000 dawn of grain could already support a small-scale war. It was true that Jiang Pingji did not lack grain, but it did not mean that she would not feel distressed if the enemy intercepted or burned her grain. The audience was silent for a moment. Zhongfei yesterday's stars. I remember that when the Dongqing earthquake occurred in Shangjing, the streamer seemed to have exchanged a lot of grain from the streaming system. 50,000 dawn of grain is indeed a lot, but there are more people in our streaming room. A conservative estimate is that if each person donates 1 caddy of grain, it should be enough. Because Jiang Pingji was too unconventional, she had only once asked for a reward during the time when she had been streaming for many years. If not for someone reminding her, the audience would have almost forgotten that she had a golden finger of the system. What was there to be afraid of when there was a lack of grain? The 850,000 salted fish lacked everything except 3 to 5 caddies of grain. As long as Jiang Pingji asked, they would definitely donate. They had been freeloading in the streaming room for many years. Now that they finally had a reason to spend money, they must let the people in the other world see their extravagance. Lu Yakong, yes. Streamer, let us drown Huang Song with grain. The audience's interest was aroused. Before the tycoon could give a reward, Jiang Pingji actually stopped him. Host V, no need. Keep it to buy candy for yourself. Even if you give me a reward, I won't exchange it for grain. It's meaningless. Jiang Pingji had her own considerations. The earthquake in Shangjing was a last resort. Now that they were far from being at the end of the line, she would not use the system's exchange platform. It was not because she wanted to save face, but because she had to pay a price if she used it. Taking 10,000 steps back, if there was really a shortage of grain, she would not need the audience to give her a reward. After so many years of streaming, her popularity points had long accumulated to a terrifying number. If she really exchanged it for grain, not to mention drowning Huang Song, she could drown all the people in the 5 countries in the world in the sea of rice. Hearing her say so, the audience could only suppress the impulse to stick their heads out. Qianshang Nan Bai Yue Guang. Okay Brainiac, I'll go buy candy now. Jiang Pingji. After the audience's interruption, Jiang Pingji's anger was also replaced by reason. Qingqing Liye. Streamer, without the 50,000 dawn of grain, will the army be short of grain? There was no one in the tent. Jiang Pingji said in a low voice, no. We can't put all our eggs in one basket. Similarly, there will not be only one grain line. Hu County and Xingqing are one. There are few others. Without the 50,000 dawn, they will at most suffer a little, but they will not starve. Not to mention, Qiguan Rang would not let Huang Song take advantage of them and escape unscathed. Chapter 1168. Su Bei's territory was in the south, while Huang Song's territory was adjacent to Jiang Pingji's, located at the border between the north and the south. Although Huang Song and Su Bei had formed an alliance, the two families were not familiar with each other and did not trust each other well. Currently they were still in the same bed but sharing different dreams. On the surface, the two families had formed an alliance to resist Jiang Pingji, but the real main force was Su Bei's army. Huang Song assisted from the side. It was not that Huang Song did not want to send troops to confront Jiang Pingji head-on. The key was that the main battlefield was near Huzhou and Hu counties. If Huang Song sent a large number of troops to participate in the battle, he would definitely have to obtain the approval of the host, Su Bei. This action was akin to Su Bei removing his snail's shell and revealing his defenseless, tender flesh to Huang Song. Huang Song dared to think of it, but Su Bei dared not do it. This was one of the reasons, but there was another main reason. Huang Song had yet to recover from the previous battle. If he went all out now, who could guarantee that Su Bei would not betray him midway? Although the two families were allies, they were still on guard against each other. Neither was willing to trust the other completely. Of course, these reasons that would damage the relationship between allies could not be put out in the open. It was enough for both sides to be aware of it. Huang Song did not send his main force, but he deployed 30,000 elite troops to assist Su Bei. This was the actual number of troops participating in the battle. If the tens of thousands of laborers in the grain transportation team and the water injection army were included, it would not be this number. After rounding up the numbers and boasting, Huang Song raised the flag of 100,000 troops. His 100,000 troops plus Su Bei's 300,000 troops, amounted to a total of 400,000 troops. The only question was whether Lu Shi was afraid. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Wang Zuazikai Sin Lingjun. Under Phil. I suddenly thought of Boss Chao's 800,000 troops, the benchmark of the water injection army. Han Zhaolai Di Lu Xuanda. Ha, the person above you are not giving old Chao face. Be careful that the little fairy old Chao will argue with you. Naturally, Jiang Pingji was not afraid. 400,000 troops was indeed a frightening number, but she was not easily intimidated. Perhaps because Jiang Pingji's reaction was too calm, Huang Song felt that he could not bring himself to lose face, so he decided to go big. According to the scouts' information, a batch of 50,000 dawn of grain would be sent from Xingqing in Hu County to the Sichuan Plains. If they could intercept this batch of food, it would undoubtedly be the greatest boost to their morale, and at the same time, it would also deal a blow to the enemy's morale. The old General Yuan Xen volunteered to go out to battle, rubbing his palms in anticipation of making a contribution. Nie Sun frowned and objected. It's a good thing that the old general is willing to risk his life for the Lord, but we don't have a good understanding of the terrain in Hu County. My lord, why don't we let a general who is familiar with Hu Commandery lead the troops to intercept the grain? If I remember correctly, my lord's camp. Without waiting for Nie Sun to finish speaking, Yuan Sun said, the Lord's great cause is the most important. Military advisor Nie should know the severity of the situation. Don't involve your personal grudges in this. Everyone in the tent knew that the relationship between Yuanxin and Nie Sun was so bad that they were like fire and water. Yuan Xen volunteered to fight, but Nie Sun brushed him off, saying in front of everyone that Yuan Xen was not suitable and recommending a newcomer with no experience. From Yuan Xen's point of view, Nie Sun was trying to challenge him openly. On one hand, he was recommending new generals to build connections in the army, and on the other hand, he was smearing his name in front of his lord. This person's intentions were truly sinister. Although Yuan Xen was a military man who practiced martial arts, his words were harsh and sharp. The moment he opened his mouth, he threw the label of forming a clique for personal gain at Nie Sun. To be honest, this ability to smear one's eyes was not considered too bad in the harem. At least he could survive for more than 10 episodes. Nie Sun's expression darkened. His peripheral vision swept across the people in the tent, and he had to hold back his rebuttal. The war was imminent, and it was not a good thing for civil and military officials to fight. The old general's words are harsh. I'm just taking precautions. The old general is not familiar with the environment in Zhou County. If we fail to intercept the grain and are surrounded and fall into the enemy's trap due to carelessness, how will we escape? Nie Sun suppressed his anger and explained patiently, but he did not know that he was setting up a terrible flag for himself. If I have any selfish intentions, how can the Lord not see through it with your sharp eyes? Yuan Xen laughed coldly. He did not believe a single word that Nie Sun said. Nie Sun gave in for the sake of the big picture, so Yuan Xen only thought that he was guilty. Not only did he not forgive him, but he was also aggressive. He knew who Nie Sun wanted to recommend. A general from Hu County who was not famous and did not have much experience in battle. Nie Sun wanted to entrust such an important task as intercepting the grain to a newbie. How could he not see through what he was secretly planning? Wasn't it because he saw that the Yuan family's general had too much power in the military, so he wanted to instigate the Lord to support a newbie to balance the military power? If Nie Sun succeeded, those powerful generals would owe him a favor, and his status in the Lord's tent would rise as well. Humph! What a good plan. Yuan Xen had already labeled Nie Sun as a traitor and conspirator. No matter what Nie Sun said or did, he would be accused of conspiring. Yuan Xen stepped out with a cold smile and said, I am willing to make a military pledge. If I cannot intercept this batch of grain, I am willing to be punished by military law. Since the military pledge had been made, Huang Song could not help Nie Sun even if he wanted to. He could only hand the matter of intercepting the grain to Yuan Xen. Nie Sun could only retreat with an ashen face. To run into a madman like Yuan Xen, he must have had 800 lifetimes of bad luck. Helpless, Nie Sun could only privately ask Qing Jing and Feng Ju to give Yuan Xen an external brain. Yuan Xen, this boorish fellow, dared to defy the heavens and the earth and Nie Sun, but he did not dare to defy the two most useful strategists in Huang Song's tent. Under their suggestions, Huang Song chose a strategist to follow Yuan Exin and give him advice at critical moments. However, Huang Song and the others were too naive and underestimated how arrogant Yuan Exin was. The operation to intercept the grain was very successful. Although they were resisted by the troops guarding the grain, Yuan Exin had the advantage in numbers and managed to defeat them in a short time. He happily escorted 50,000 dawn of grain back. Humph! Niechin has nothing to say now. Yuan Exin rode his horse and led the way. He looked very pleased with himself as if he could see the scene of Niechin's livid face and being despised by his lord. The strategist who was sent to be the external brain was silent. After these days of interaction, he already knew how bad the relationship between Yuan Exin and Niechin was. To be honest, Yuan Exin's conspiracy theories made even him, a proper strategist, gasp in amazement and gape. If not for Yuan Exin's analysis, he would not have known that Niechin was such a heinous person. However, Yuan Exin's analysis was very brainwashing. Just by listening to his one-sided words, it really did make some sense. Sigh, poor Niechin. General, do not be careless. We are still in Hu County's Xing City South Road. We are still in the enemy's territory. What do we want to do if we don't tuck our tails between our legs and leave? Yuan Exin did not care. His confidence was inflated. Chapter 1169. Yuan Exin's experience tells us one thing. Don't act pretentiously or you'll be struck by lightning. Don't raise flags for no reason. Yuan Exin had raised a huge flag, so he couldn't blame others for not giving him face. As they approached the exit of the South Road, the strategist became more and more nervous, not daring to be negligent. On the contrary, Yuan Exin was happily humming a tune. Seeing the strategist's serious expression, he couldn't help but advise, "Strategist, why are you so nervous? We intercepted the rations as fast as lightning and as fast as thunder. I'm sure the Lu thieves are still in the dark and don't know that the rear supply line has fallen. How will they stop us and set up an ambush?" Yuan Exin hated scholars who dilly-dally and hesitantly. Each and every one of them had groundless worries, and it was annoying. The strategist in front of him was inexperienced and couldn't control Yuan Exin at all, let alone make him listen obediently. Hearing Yuan Exin's words, the strategist couldn't say anything else. Isn't it a pleasure to have friends coming from afar? After marching for an hour and seeing that they were about to leave the south road of Hu County's Xing City, a loud voice resounded in the sky like thunder on a sunny day. The words, "Isn't it a pleasure to have friends coming from afar?" echoed in the mountains. Yuan Exin was shocked and hurriedly grabbed the reins. "Why don't you rest for a while and let us do our duty as hosts?" Just as the layers of echoes faded away, another sentence was uttered. "There's an ambush." Yuan Exin couldn't care less about being slapped in the face. He quickly drew his sword and prepared to face the enemy. Just as he finished speaking, the enemy emerged like mushrooms after the rain. The road ahead was blocked and there were traces of the enemy behind them. Seeing so many enemies appear without a sound, everyone turned pale with fright. The originally orderly formation was now in chaos. Yuan Exin was even more furious. The enemy hadn't even attacked and they were already in chaos. "What a stupid teammate," the strategist said. "The enemy outnumbers us. General, please make a decision quickly." This strategist was just an advisor and had no military power in the army. Thus, he had to ask for Yuan Exin's permission before he could command the army. Yuan Exin gritted his teeth and said, "Are we really going to burn the 50,000 dawn of rations?" The strategist said, "If we don't burn it, the enemy will definitely take it back. It's not worth it." The enemy had completely surrounded them. If they did not burn the food, these supply wagons would become a burden to their escape. If they encountered someone with combat experience, it would be difficult for them to break out of the encirclement. Instead, they would be worn down by the other party until they died without a complete corpse. It was better to be ruthless and not let the enemy get what he couldn't get. They suffered losses when they burned through their rations, but the enemy's losses were even greater. It wasn't that Yuan Exin didn't know this, but his heart ached. Just as they were about to transport the 50,000 dawn of grain out of Xingqing South Road, they didn't expect that the enemy wouldn't chase after them. Instead, they sent soldiers to block their way. Time was of the essence and Yuan Exin didn't have much time to think. Burn it. Gather the troops and break out. Although Yuan Exin was petty and liked to snitch on Niechin, he was still reliable when it came to major issues. At this moment Qiguan Rang pinched his feather fan and shook it. Seeing that the enemy had made a move, he moved his wrist and the feather fan moved down along with his movement. Kill! The horn of attack sounded, resounding through the mountains and fields. The loud and clear echo entered everyone's eardrums. Military advisor, they've set fire to the rations. Before the two armies met, their sharp eyes saw the fire and smoke rising from the supply team. Qiguan Rang sneered and said, "It doesn't matter if the rations are burned. Tastes just right with human flesh." Liyun couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. Just the thought of it made his throat ache. Qiguan Rang's eyes were cold and he said coldly, "The rations can't be saved. If we can save a portion then we'll be lucky. If not then it's not a pity. They were the ones who started the fire, so let them bear the consequences themselves. Pass down the order, only surround and not attack." Although Qiguan Rang and his men looked relaxed as they surrounded the area, in reality, they had only been lying in ambush for 4 hours. 4 hours ago they were still taking shortcuts elsewhere. If they had been a little later they could only watch as the enemy escaped with the rations. Although the army didn't show any signs of fatigue, they had used up a lot of energy, so it wasn't wise to attack forcefully. Since Yuan Xin and his men were so heartless as to set fire to the rations, then let them have a taste of their own medicine. Unable to break through, they could only be accompanied by the flames. By doing so, not only could they vent their anger, but they could also cover up the army's lack of combat power. What he said just now seemed to be an act to scare the enemy, but in reality, it was Qiguan Rang's psychological attack, using it to create the illusion that they had sufficient combat power. The strategy of only surrounding and not attacking was also to confuse the enemy and exhaust their patience and rationality. Liyun said, "I will obey your order." Qiguan Rang brought over a small folding stool and sat down to watch the show, fanning himself. The weather was hot. Even though he had changed into a summer robe, he was still sweating profusely. Looking at the continuous fire, he was even angrier. He was leisurely and carefree, but Yuan Xian and the others were suffering. The enemy could always predict the direction they would break through. That was fine, but the enemy was a coward, refusing to fight. The strategist said, "General, don't be anxious. First stabilize the battle formation and gather the troops to break through. Don't be disorderly." The more disorderly they were, the more advantage the enemy had. The fire in the supply wagons was already considerable. Based on the fire, the enemy would not be able to save much rations even if they wanted to. If these 50,000 dawn of rations were burned to ashes, their goal of intercepting the enemy's supply line would be achieved. Now they only needed to gather the troops in one place and break through. Yuan Xin also knew this, but the strategist's nagging was more annoying than 10,000 flies. "I know about this. You don't have to waste your breath." The strategist's face turned green. He could only hold on to the reins to ensure that he did not lose his composure. He finally understood Nyesun's pain. He really wanted to jump up and smash this person's head open. Defense was Qiguan Rang's forte. The troops under his tent were also well-trained soldiers. He dared not say that all of them could follow orders strictly, but they would not make mistakes in basic commands. The power of one person was not enough to be feared, but hundreds and thousands of people could form an impenetrable human wall. They could not break through in front, but there was no way back. This was the predicament Yuan Xian was in. What was more frightening was that the fire in the supply wagons at the back was getting bigger. The enemy was further shrinking the line of defense, squeezing their space. The number of soldiers killed by the enemy was not as many as those burned to death. At this moment Yuan Xian's face was ashen. He knew the enemy's plan. How sinister. Battle cries shook the heavens and corpses littered the field. Yuan Xin and his men's eyes were red from killing. After fighting for 2 hours, they finally successfully broke through the encirclement with the remaining soldiers from Xingqing South Road. In this battle Yuan Xian lost 50% of his troops. Out of the 50%, 70% were burned to death. It was not easy to break through. Yuan Xian and his men naturally did not dare to stay. They led the defeated soldiers and escaped as fast as the wind. Li Yun led his troops and pretended to kill for a while, until the enemy's silhouette disappeared without a trace. Qiguan Rang held a feather fan in his right hand and a folded folding stool in his left. He looked in the direction where the enemy left. Chapter 1170. Li Yun said, "Then there's finally an explanation." However, he looked at the battlefield with some pity. That was 50,000 dawn of military provisions, but now it was burnt to the ground. Fortunately, the military counselor had calculated the enemy's marching route, so they were able to stop the troop that intercepted the provisions in time. Now that they made the enemy bleed, it could be considered as atoning for their crime. Otherwise he would be too ashamed to face his lord. Qiguanrang frowned deeply. He did not agree with Li Yun's optimism. If it wasn't for the lord's use of the method of storing the provisions separately, building multiple granaries and grain lines, I'm afraid the loss today would be even greater. To save manpower and time, many feudal lords like to build a unified granary to store the military provisions in order to facilitate management. If Jiang Pingji chose to do the same, the troop that Huang Song sent to intercept the provisions would earn a lot. The provisions they intercepted and burned would not only be 50,000 dawn of grain, it could be 200,000 dawn or 300,000 dawn or even more. That was a month's worth of military provisions for 100,000 troops. What would the soldiers eat if they burned it all at once? How would they fight without provisions? A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Qiguanrang said coldly, if we fall into the same pit twice, what use would the Lord have for us? Upon hearing his words, Li Yun's expression, which had relaxed with much difficulty, became serious again. Yes, Qiguanrang was right. So what if they killed half of the enemy's troops? Those 50,000 dawn of grain were also burned clean by the enemy. What was there to be proud of? You're right, military counselor. Li Yun had a good temper. If it was another arrogant general who was lectured by Qiguanrang, even if he did not show it on his face, he would be dissatisfied. In terms of status and authority in the army, the two were of the same level. What right did Qiguanrang have to lecture him? If Qiguanrang did not understand Li Yun's character, he would not have said such things and made himself a political enemy for no reason. Qiguanrang and the rest returned to the camp. Just as they arrived, a soldier came forward to report that they had caught a suspicious person outside the camp who was spying on the camp. Because the identity reported by the person was suspicious, they did not dare to handle it on their own. They could only report to Qiguanrang. Qiguanrang raised his eyelids and asked coldly, suspicious person? Who? What was the identity of this person? How could the soldiers not know how to deal with him? The soldier said, the person who came claimed to be the Lord's younger brother, and he had many private seals on him that could prove his identity. I didn't dare to deal with him without permission. The Lord's concubine brother? Qiguanrang's mind raced. He was stunned for a while before he remembered who this person was. Wasn't that Lu Zhao? Although he was the Lord's younger brother, Lu Zhao was very tactful. He usually acted like a hedonistic son of a rich family and was not a threat at all. Qiguanrang had been wary of Lu Zhao at first. He had even wondered if he should do something so that Lu Zhao would die prematurely in his prime so that he would not cause trouble for his lord. However, the lord did not allow it, and Lu Zhao had been very obedient all these years. Qiguanrang could only suppress his restless heart. Bring him here, Qiguanrang said. Whether it's San Lang or not, we'll know at a glance. When he saw Lu Zhao in a slightly sorry state, he was instantly speechless. He thought that someone was pretending to be Lu Zhao, but he didn't expect it to be him. San Langjun, why didn't you stay in Chongzhou? Why did you come to the front lines? Qiguanrang signaled for the soldiers to loosen the bindings. Lu Zhao had a harmless, naive and sweet aura. Now that he was tied up and carried over like a chicken, he looked even more pitiful. Quickly untie him. Lu Zhao rubbed his hands that were slightly numb from being tied up. With a bitter expression he said, Sir Qiguan, you're really strict with your troops. I almost lost my life. If it wasn't for the intelligence of the little boy beside me, who hurriedly revealed his identity, I'm afraid that I would have gone to the King of Hell to complain about my grievances. Qiguanrang's expression did not change, but in his heart he could not help but raise the butcher's knife. Without waiting for Qiguanrang to react, Lu Zhao smiled and said, Sir, what I said just now was all nonsense. Please don't take it to heart. Spying on the camp is a serious crime. If I'm not careful and get shot into a hornet's nest, it's my own fault. You can't blame me, sir. Qiguanrang furrowed his brows and used his eyes to ask Lu Zhao for the reason he came to the front lines. Lu Zhao saw that Qiguanrang's expression was even colder and couldn't help but shiver. He begged, Sir, can you send some troops to Zhao? What does San Lang need troops for? Lu Zhao said, Of course it's to escort Zhao to see my sister. I have something important to tell her. Although the security in the north was good and it was peaceful, the closer they got to the war zone, the more chaotic it became. Lu Xiao was used to having exquisite clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. When he went out, he was obviously a child of wealth. Robbing him was the right thing to do. Therefore, he mustered up the courage to borrow troops from Qiguan Rang to escort him to see Jiang Pingji. The front lines are dangerous and chaotic. San Lang shouldn't put himself in danger. Qiguan Rang advised, if San Lang has anything to say to the Lord, you can write a letter and send a horse to deliver it to the Lord. You'll get a reply in at most 3 days. This was already a compromise, but Lu Xiao refused to eat it. He shook his head and refused, still insisting on his own opinion. Qiguan Rang was speechless. What an infuriating spoilt brat. Lu Xiao said, it's not that I don't trust you, but this is a special matter. I have to tell my sister personally. Please tell me everything first. Qiguan Rang saw that Lu Xiao's expression was sincere and he even restrained his usual frivolous behavior. He faintly realized that the situation was serious. If that's the case, then I'll send 100 guards to escort San Lang to see the Lord. Lu Xiao's eyes shone brightly. He said happily, thank you, sir, for fulfilling my wish. God knew how a pampered and spoiled son like him ran all the way here. He must have suffered a lot along the way. When Qiguan Rang sent Lu Xiao over, Jiang Pingji was correcting military affairs. Why is he here? Lu Xiao howled as he ran into the tent from outside. He said without a care for his image, Sister, save me, Jiang Pingji asked. There's a ghost chasing after you. You're crying and howling in broad daylight. Lu Xiao secretly wiped his tears. She was really his biological sister. Do you know there's a war now? If you're captured by the enemy's scouts, you won't be able to keep your life. Jiang Pingji sternly reprimanded Lu Xiao. If Lu Xiao was taken as a hostage, she wouldn't be merciful. Get up. It's not proper to act like this. Lu Xiao pouted. Oh. Tell me. Why do you need me to save you? Can't you write a letter? Why do you have to come personally? Jiang Pingji asked. Lu Xiao looked around and said, Sister, can you dismiss the servants? So mysterious. Jiang Pingji didn't think that Lu Xiao had anything important to do. However, she still asked the soldiers in the tent to leave and turned off the live stream. Tell me. There's only the two of us in the tent now. There's no third person. Lu Xiao sat next to Jiang Pingji and squirmed. His expression was so weird that he looked like he had constipation for more than a month. Sister, father. Lu Xiao pulled his sleeves and hung his head. He wants me to get married. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Chapter 1171. You don't like it? Is it because the woman's family background is too low? Jiang Pingji frowned. Although Lu Xiao was the son of a concubine, marrying the daughter of a hunter, even if she had saved his life, was too unseemly. Lu Xiao's expression froze as if he wanted to say something. But when he saw Jiang Pingji's face, he swallowed his words. Do you think I'm someone who cares about my family background? Father liked that girl, and in order to make father smile, little brother married her. But, Lu Xiao said, but little brother has some reasons that others can't know, so I can't marry that girl. I definitely can't. Jiang Pingji glanced at Lu Xiao. Not enough for outsiders to understand? Lu Xiao avoided her gaze and awkwardly changed the topic. A few days ago I went to visit Master Liaochen in Hejian County. I heard that Master Liaochen is a good friend of Min's mother. Jiang Pingji looked down and asked, and then? Lu Xiao laughed dryly. According to Great Master Liaochen, when Min's official mother was pregnant for the 3rd time, she was disturbed by evil spirits due to the lack of yang energy in her body. She had no choice but to hide with Great Master Liaochen to find a way to get rid of the evil spirits. Sigh, it's a pity that the monastery is austere and not good for nurturing the fetus. After listening, Jiang Pingji further confirmed that there was a hidden meaning in Lu Xiao's words. He was probably really looking for him to ask for help. Mother's 3rd pregnancy? Why don't I know about this? She pretended not to know. Aren't there only 2 times? Lu Xiao gulped nervously. Sister, don't scare little brother. If Jiang Pingji really didn't know about this, Lu Xiao wouldn't be seeking protection today. He would be courting death. Jiang Pingji did not tease him and continued to ask. What else do you have to say? Lu Xiao's eyes darted around and only spoke after a while. His words were also intermittent. This little brother has learned a lot of Zen philosophy from Master Liaochen. When she heard him talk about evil spirits, she asked him if there were really evil spirits in the world. What the great master said was true. Evil and humans existed side by side in the world. If the human body lacked yang energy, it was easy to be targeted by evil. As he spoke, Grand Master began to talk about some interesting things. There's a story that left a deep impression on me. Jiang Pingji sneered at Lu Zhao. To be fair, Lu Zhao was truly pitiful. If not for his family background, he might have had some achievements. What story? A story passed down from the 16 Kingdoms period. Lu Zhao struggled internally for a while before he said hesitantly, "It's said that the soul of a certain noble goddess left her body and roamed the king of hell's palace at night. She was captured by the black and white impermanence, and the judge said that she couldn't return to the mortal world before her time was up. She refused to accept it and asked the judge why she was wrongly judged. The judge said that her body had already been taken over by a nameless wild ghost, but that wild ghost did not have the memories of a real noblewoman. Because the memories were attached to the soul, although there were remnants of the memories in the physical body, these memories only recognized the noble lady's soul. Unfortunately, in order to assume the identity of the noblewoman, the wandering ghost lied to the noblewoman's relatives that she had lost her memory and took the opportunity to take over her place." Lu Zhao's fingers were trembling as he told the story. He was afraid that Jiang Pingji would beat him up in the next second and kill him to silence him. Jiang Pingji did not make a move. "Zhao, are you saying I'm a nameless ghost?" Lu Zhao's face was pale as he shook his head. Even if he was given 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to openly provoke them. Although he didn't know who this sister of his was, Master Liaochen also said that he couldn't afford to offend her. Lu Zhao didn't have any interactions with the original Lu Shi. They weren't close siblings, but the person in front of him had taken care of him. Lu Zhao thought about the truth he discovered not long ago. He felt a chill on his neck and couldn't sleep well at night. He was afraid that when he woke up the next day his brain would move. He thought that his hidden identity could provide him with protection, but he didn't expect that he was also an abandoned chess piece on the surface. As an abandoned chess piece, there was no guarantee of his life. When the chess player felt that he had lost his value, he would only end up being abandoned. He cherished his life and he wanted to live. After thinking about it, he still took Master Liaochen's suggestion and came all the way to Jiang Pingji. "Forget it, I'm not an unreasonable person. No matter what you know, if you want to live for a long time, it's better to continue pretending to be deaf and dumb. Even if you really become a pig, I'll allow you to live the rest of your life in luxury." Lu Zhao couldn't help but shiver. Concubine Dai was right. When the gods fought, a small shrimp like him didn't even have the qualifications to be cannon fodder. Lu Zhao laughed dryly. "Sister, I naturally believe in your words. I'll have to ask you to take care of my father." Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes at him. She rolled her eyes angrily. "If you're so afraid of my father, why did you dare to escape?" Lu Zhao said, "I had to choose the lesser of two evils. Didn't I have you to protect me?" Jiang Pingji said, "Stay in the camp and don't run around. The battle at the front line is serious. Don't add to the chaos." Lu Zhao secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He secretly glanced at Jiang Pingji's eyes. He wasn't sure if Jiang Pingji had received his hint. If he had, why was she so calm and unperturbed? Judging from her reaction, she seemed to have known the inside story for a long time. If she really knew, why could she pretend that nothing had happened? "What are you thinking about?" Jiang Pingji asked out of the blue. Lu Zhao blurted out, "Of course I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about why you're not afraid." Jiang Pingji said, "Superfluous feelings will blind people's eyes and cause them to be blind so they can't see more concrete things." Lu Zhao asked in return, "So you don't have superfluous feelings?" "I don't have that, so I see far more things than you do. People will be afraid of the unknown, but things that they know won't." With that, Lu Zhao was even more certain of his guess. "It's getting late. You should go and rest first. I still have to deal with government affairs. Otherwise, I'll stay up until late at night again." Lu Zhao left tactfully. He left. Jiang Pingji didn't deal with government affairs according to his instructions. Instead, she stared at the god slayer on the sword rack in a daze. Suddenly, she asked in her heart, "System, Lu Shi didn't die, right?" According to Wei Xi's revelation, Jiang Pingji didn't obtain the memories of the body's original owner. Because of the language barrier, she wandered outside. Just like the nameless wild ghost in the story, she couldn't obtain the body's memories because her soul didn't match. She could only pretend to have amnesia to deceive the body's relatives. Jiang Pingji was different. She had Lu Shi's memories. As long as she searched carefully, she could even find a lot of content that Lu Shi himself had forgotten. Before Lu Zhao told her the story, she could think that the system had helped. However, Lu Zhao came all the way here to tell her this. The wait was different. Lu Shi was very likely not dead. Thinking back carefully, Lu Shi's death was quite interesting. She was just frightened by the bandits. She stepped forward bravely to block a knife for Wei Jingxian. The knife cut her collar, but it didn't hurt her flesh. After that, Lu Shi had a high fever. After that, Jiang Pingji was pulled over by the system. Jiang Pingji's brain and spirit were strong. She could accurately sense if there was a strange second presence in a body. The conclusion was that Lu Shi's spirit had died. The death of his spirit meant complete death. Chapter 1172. He didn't know if it was his imagination, but Qing Yuan felt that his lord had been very listless for the past 2 days. He was not the only one who felt this way. The viewers in the live broadcast room also realized that their energetic and disrespectful streamer had entered a strange, sleepy period. At first they could still laugh and tease Jiang Pingji, but they didn't get a reply, so they felt something was wrong. Oh Shu, did something bad happen to the host recently? Or was he bullied? Junpe, our streamer has always been a bully, right? Maybe it's because of my body? Qin Shi Ruyan, Auntie finally visited the streamer? Drink more hot water or brown sugar water. Don't be greedy for cold water. The audience scratched their ears and cheeks. Their way of showing concern was a little clumsy, but anyone with a discerning eye could see their sincerity. Compared to the audience's anxiety across the plain screen, it was more convenient for Qing Yuan to be her secretary. Qing Yuan asked, "Has the Lord encountered something troubling recently?" Jiang Pingji turned her head to look at him. She pursed her lips tightly and did not say a word. She only used her gaze to ask silently. Qing Yuan said with slight awkwardness, "I haven't seen you for the past 2 days. You're always in low spirits." Jiang Pingji leaned back in boredom and said indifferently, "Nothing. I'm just bored and too lazy to move." Qing Yuan thought about the hot weather outside and thought he had found a reason. "So it's Xia Yan." Jiang Pingji blinked and deliberately repeated, "No, I just find it boring." Qing Yuan was puzzled. "It's boring." Jiang Pingji sighed in her heart. In the end, she did not speak her mind. She wanted to say, "Fighting for the world is too boring, I don't want to play anymore." If the strategists in the tent knew what she was thinking at this moment, they would probably explode in anger. Before this moment, she had never felt such a tired emotion, but now it was like a volcano that had been suppressed for a long time, suddenly erupting. She asked Qing Yuan, "If there is someone in this world who is exactly the same as me, would Gong Liao recognize the wrong lord?" Qing Yuan was even more confused. He could not figure out the meaning behind Jiang Pingji's question and could only answer carefully. How can an ordinary person imitate the Lord? Even if they looked exactly the same, could they imitate the exact same temperament and behavior? "I'm loyal to my Lord. If I can't even tell my Lord apart, then I won't have the face to live in this world." When Qing Yuan finished speaking, he was magnanimous. Jiang Pingji smiled. It was a rare smile for the past 2 days. "You're right. I'm the most unique person in this world. Not just anyone can replace me." Qing Yuan couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. His lord wasn't someone who liked to be sad and sad. There must be a reason for her sudden depression. His expression suddenly became solemn. Could it be that someone has harbored evil intentions and is trying to use the technique of substituting master? When he blurted out these words, Qing Yuan was also shocked by his own imagination. "Although it's not the target, it's not far." Jiang Pingji's answer horrified Qing Yuan. "Wait a minute. How is this possible? Who has such ambition?" Qing Yuan's eyes revealed a murderous intent. He already had the intention to kill the unknown target. As long as Jiang Pingji told him who that person was, Qing Yuan would dig him out and kill him even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground. "My lord, this matter concerns your safety. If you know anything, don't hide it, lest you give the villain an opportunity to take advantage of." In all fairness, Qing Yuan didn't quite believe that this would happen. One's appearance could be faked, but how could one's temperament, habits, and memories be faked? Jiang Pingji had been with the officials in the tent for many years. They didn't dare to say that they completely understood their lord, but it was impossible for them to not know anything. If an imposter wanted to replace her, it wouldn't take long before the truth was revealed. In this way, was there still value in substituting master? Qing Yuan was suspicious and worried, but his lord was smiling so easily that he didn't know what to do. Ah, I'm just teasing you. It's just that I had a very realistic dream a few days ago. I found out that a demon copied my memory and took over my body. He took the opportunity to blend in with you. I couldn't tell the difference between a dream and reality for a while. I've been paranoid for the past 2 days and scared you instead. It's my fault. Jiang Pingji laughed and tried to deal with Qing Yuan. However, she was very clear in her heart whether this was a joke or not. Lu Zhao hinted that the real Lu Shi was still alive, so she knew that things were not that simple. She could obtain the memory of the original Lu Shi with the help of the system. Who knew if the original could obtain her memory from the system? Because Jiang Pingji guarded against the system and protected the memory of the brain very well, the memory system before her transmigration could not be hacked and copied. The memory after her transmigration was uncertain. As long as the memory was copied when she unified the world, the system would then give the recorded memory to the original Lu Shi. Then, who knew if that Lu Shi could perfectly replace her? The purpose of the system was clear from the beginning to the end. It wanted an important source of energy, not only the popularity of the streaming room, but also the luck that could not be understood. According to the saying of ancient times, those who were blessed with luck were people with great luck, such as the emperor or other members of the royal family. Therefore, the system instigated Jiang Pingji to strive for the path of becoming an empress in the palace. The empress or the women in the harem were the existence closest to the emperor. It was very convenient for the system to seize luck. However, Jiang Pingji did not play her cards according to common sense. She wanted to be the emperor herself and conveniently diss the two systems. The system could only find another way. Didn't she want to be the emperor? Then the system would cultivate a puppet that could perfectly replace her and help her become the emperor. It would be more convenient and unscrupulous to absorb luck. She thought that the spirit of the original Lu Shi had completely disappeared. The system had also given her such a misleading message. But she did not think of another possibility. Perhaps the original Lu Shi had not disappeared, but was imprisoned somewhere by the system? If the original Lu Shi was used as a trump card to deal with her, it would be a very good card. It would definitely be able to catch her unprepared. Analyzing from all aspects, substituting the original Lu Shi was the most efficient method. If Lu Zhao had not secretly informed her, Jiang Pingji would have taken a long time to realize this. Thinking of this, she could not help but frown. She felt that fighting for the world was boring and depressed. It was not that she was afraid of the person behind the scenes, but she did not like people coveting her achievements. She was the one who dug the pit, she was the one who cultivated the saplings, she was the one who fertilized, killed the insects and pollinated the crops. After all this work, the fruits that were about to ripen were plucked by someone else. The bully had already come to her doorstep. Was she not allowed to explode? She really wanted to break the jar and ask the person behind the scenes to come out and fight for the bean-sized farm. She would not accompany him. Her depressed mood did not last long. Soon she was stimulated by a battle report. Quickly prepare the troops and horses. They did not know how to pick a day to fight a war. Chapter 1173. Speaking of that day, Qiguan Rang had forced Yuan Xian's army to retreat and caused them heavy losses. Yuan Xian had successfully escaped with his defeated army, like a stray dog. Although they had successfully burned 50,000 dong of the enemy's rations, they had paid the price of half the casualties. As the commander, Yuan Xian's crime was unforgivable. Yuan Xian's personality was more impulsive and he had made many enemies. Those people took advantage of this opportunity to kick him when he was down. Who asked Yuan Xian to be so arrogant and make such a military pledge? Yuan Xian was a person with high aspirations, an arrogant personality and strong self-esteem. He was usually respected by others. When had he ever been pushed down by others? For a moment he couldn't suppress his grief and anger. He said, "This is indeed my fault, but I am not willing to accept punishment. The main culprit is someone else." Huang Song subconsciously furrowed his brows. He wanted to punish Yuan Xian heavily to clean up the atmosphere, but if he did that, it would inevitably disappoint the old general. He was already in a difficult situation. He didn't expect Yuan Xian to say something like this. What did he mean by, "the main culprit is someone else"? Before Huang Song could find an excuse to send Yuan Xian away, Yuan Xian said, I suspect that someone has colluded with the enemy and leaked information. Colluded with the enemy and leaked information? Hearing these words, Huang Song's ears couldn't help but perk up. What do you mean colluded with the enemy and leaked information? Thinking of Yuan Xian's usual personality, Huang Song felt that this old fellow's words couldn't be completely trusted. Yuan Xian pointed. Everyone looked in the direction he was pointing and were all shocked. Everyone had different reactions. Nieson was about to explode. He couldn't help but stand up and scold, Yuan Xian, if you are afraid of punishment, just say it. Why do you have to accuse me? He was really angry. His usual gentle demeanor were all thrown to the back of his head. The veins on his forehead were bulging. Yuan Xian said, that day when I volunteered to go out to intercept the rations, do you still remember what you said? Nieson was stunned. What did he say? Yuan Xian said, you said that I don't know much about the terrain in Hu County. If you let me lead the army and we fail to intercept the grain, we'll be surrounded and fall into the enemy's trap. How can I escape? Why didn't I know that you, Yun, had the ability to predict the future? It's no secret that you and I don't get along. This old man also made you lose face, causing you to lose the chance to recommend a new general and form a clique for personal gain. It's hard to guarantee that you, Yun, won't harbor a grudge in your heart in order to frame this old man and secretly use underhanded methods. Nieson scolded angrily, what kind of bullshit are you spouting? Did they really think that he, Nieson, wouldn't swear? Did they really think that he was made of clay and didn't have a temper? After saying that, Nieson even drew his sword from his waist. If it weren't for the fact that a few of his colleagues saw that the situation was getting out of hand and stopped him, he would have really taken up his sword and fought with Yuan Xian alone. Being able to beat him was secondary. The main point was that he absolutely could not endure this humiliation. Yuan Xian sneered, could it be that you're angry out of humiliation? Huang Song's patience with Yuan Xian had also run out. He couldn't help but say, victory and defeat are common in military affairs. Commandant Yuan, don't be obsessed. In other words, he wanted Yuan Xian to be more open-minded and not go around biting people after losing a game. Even if Huang Song didn't really trust Niesun, it was really unsightly for Yuan Xian to go around biting people like a mad dog. Yuan Xian, however, didn't understand the meaning behind it. Instead, he thought that Huang Song was comforting him. He had the right to think so. Huang Song needed the support of his family, so he was more tolerant and kind to the generals who came from his family. Yuan Xian said, why didn't my lord investigate the route and terrain of the south road of Xing City in Hu County? Even if the troops under Lu Shi's tent were divine soldiers, if there wasn't an early warning and no one colluded with the enemy, how could they mobilize troops to the exit of the south road of Xing City in such a short time and set up an ambush in advance? Even if they arrived, they would be a tired army, and it would be even more impossible for them to kill half of their troops. It had to be said that Yuan Xian's rhythm was indeed very good. It was almost perfect. Except for a few strategists who found the loopholes in his words, the others all believed in Yuan Xian's imagination and speculation. At first it really sounded like it. Seeing this, Niesun was so angry that he blacked out and fainted. Everyone was so scared that they panicked again. At this time Feng Ju wasn't present, so only Qing Jing could say a few words of justice for Niesun. Old Commandant Yuan, you're wrong. Qing Jing said with a cold face. The enemy is familiar with the terrain of Hu County, so it's not a problem for them to take a shortcut. After a rapid march, they can indeed reach the south road of Xing City in advance and set up an ambush. They are tired soldiers, but the old commandant didn't notice. They only know how to break out of the encirclement, but they don't know how to react. Why do they only defend and not attack? Isn't it to disturb our army's morale and make the old commandant lose his rationality and sense of propriety? Most of the soldiers who died were not killed by sharp blades but by fire. Old Commandant, you can't even see through this? No one knew that ever since Niesun fainted from being bitten by Yuan Xian, Qing Jing had the intention to kill him. Keeping such a person around would cause more conflicts between the civil and military officials under the Lord's command. Sooner or later there would be a big mess. Huang Song couldn't stand it anymore. He called for a military doctor for Niesun and told Yuan Xian to go away and reflect on his actions. He would punish Niesun after he woke up. My lord, we can't indulge old Commandant Yuan anymore. Qing Jing had a headache. After today, Nie Sun and Huang Song would definitely have a complete separation. Even if they didn't, Nie Sun wouldn't be as selfless and loyal as before. Huang Song heard the complaint in Qing Jing's words. What was there to complain about? Complaining that Huang Song was biased towards his own family and treated others poorly. This would only cause the officials to have a different opinion and gradually alienate them from the Lord. Huang Song hardened his heart and said, I will give Qingyun an explanation. Qing Jing could only hope that it was not too late to salvage the situation. Who would have thought that the conflict between Yuan Xian and Nie Sun would escalate from a trivial matter to such a serious one? When Nie Sun woke up, Huang Song held his little hand and said a bunch of intimate words. Nie Sun maintained a weak smile the whole time and occasionally responded. Other than himself, no one knew what he was thinking. There were still cracks in a broken mirror, let alone a person's heart. Under Yuan Xian's various death-seeking efforts, Nie Sun developed a deep animosity towards Huang Song. Fortunately, they still had a common enemy to deal with. For the time being, they didn't have the energy to engage in any internal strife. The conflict between the people under Huang Song's command was also temporarily diverted because of the war. South Xingqing intercepted the rations. Our side suffered heavy casualties and the enemy lost 50,000 dong of rations. It was barely considered a draw. Huang Song was about to prepare for the next step when he suddenly received a secret letter from Su Bei. In this war, Su Bei was the main force. Huang Song was only a support. Su Bei's troops and Jiang Pingji's troops fought on the Sichuan plains to attract the main force. He requested Huang Song to bypass the main force and launch a sneak attack on Hu County. Although Jiang Pingji had a few supply lines, they were all concentrated in Hu County. Once Hu County was lost and the rations were cut off, their side would gain the upper hand. Chapter 1174. Qing Jing lowered his eyelids slightly and said solemnly, My lord previously sent old Lieutenant Yuan to attack the grain supply line in Hu County. Although he succeeded in burning the enemy's 50,000 dong of grain, he also alerted the enemy. How could Lu Shi let his guard down? Now that we're using the same trick again, I'm afraid the effect will be minimal. With regards to Su Bei's request, Qing Jing didn't think highly of it. Su Bei and Jiang Pingji's battle at Sichuan Plain had indeed attracted the attention of most of the troops, but this didn't mean that Huang Song could easily infiltrate the enemy's rear without any risk. The long-distance march was secondary. They were afraid that Jiang Pingji would react quickly and cut off Huang Song's main force's retreat. Hu County was a major grain-producing county. It was also the main supply channel for Jiang Pingji's army. How could it be unguarded? It was true that Huang Song and Su Bei had formed an alliance, but they wouldn't go so far as to put themselves in a perilous situation for an ally. This seemed like an easy job, but in reality, it was hard work without any benefits. No one knew who had given Su Bei such an idea. This was too much of a trap for their allies. It wasn't that Huang Song didn't understand Qing Jing's words. However, this was the first time he was working with Su Bei in an alliance. It wasn't good to shirk responsibility. They had formed an alliance because of their interests and standpoint. There was no basis for trust at all. This relationship seemed strong, but in reality, it was very fragile. Without any basis of trust, this meant that the outside world could split their alliance from the inside as long as there were enough benefits. Even if they couldn't be divided, the so-called alliance would be useless. That's true, but how do we get rid of this without hurting our friendship? Huang Song asked him. Qing Jing said, Either you tell us the truth, or you send troops to pretend to attack Hu County. Told the truth? Huang Song couldn't react for a moment. Qing Jing said, Of course it's about the original commandant intercepting the rations. Huang Song had already mobilized troops to rob their grain supply. If he were to rob them again in a short period of time, would they be defenseless? This wasn't a sneak attack, it was a suicidal attack. Huang Song frowned awkwardly, but he didn't directly say yes or no. At the same time, the Sichuan Plain was also in full swing. Jiang Pingji had conquered the northern borderline and Sangzhou. She could be considered wealthy and overbearing. She had built up another batch of cavalry in a short period of time. The terrain of the Sichuan Plains was wide, and it was extremely suitable for cavalry to roam and scatter, or for heavy cavalry to charge and cut through. She had never been stingy with her family's private treasury. Not to mention her wife's money, she had even taken out her coffin money to strengthen the army. The moment the two armies clashed, Su Bei was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. Regardless of whether it was a head-on clash or a mobile battle, he wasn't a match for them. Han Yu, who was at home and refused to see any visitors, couldn't sit still when he heard about this. Lu Shi owns 2 major horse farms in the northern borderline and Xianxia. He has plenty of war horses under his command. Who gave you the courage to fight him in the Sichuan plain? When Han Yu received the news, he was boiling tea in the courtyard. He was so angry that he knocked over the teapot and almost scalded his hand. Upon further investigation, they discovered that this foolish idea had actually been suggested by one of Su Pei's strategists. If we can defeat the enemy army head-on, our morale will be greatly boosted. Han Yu also knew this counselor. The counselor was well-versed in theory, but he had almost zero practical experience. He could be considered as another armchair strategist. At the same time, the other party also gave his own reasons. At first glance, those reasons sounded quite reasonable. It was not that the strategist had not thought about the problem of cavalry, but Jiang Pingji had conquered Songzhou for less than half a year and conquered the northern borderline for only a year. How strong could a cavalry troop be built in such a short time? The cost of training cavalry was very high. Not only did it burn money, but it also consumed a lot of time. Moreover, no matter how strong the cavalry was, as long as there were not many of them, it would not be difficult to deal with them. Excluding the advantage of cavalry, the combat strength of the two sides should not be too different. Sichuan Plain was their main battlefield, so it was not impossible for them to win. Su Pei and the others had thought of everything. The only thing they did not consider was the time Jiang Pingji had spent on training the cavalry. In order to deal with the northern borderline, she had started the formation of the cavalry battalion a few years ago. It was not a year or half a year like everyone thought. During the battle at the northern borderline, the number of cavalry under her command was not large. It was not because she was hiding her strength, but because she did not have enough war horses. After conquering the northern borderline and Songzhou, the number of war horses increased, and the cavalry battalion suddenly expanded several times. After losing the first battle, Su Pei had no choice but to send someone to pull out Han Yu, who was squatting at home and planting mushrooms. As soon as Han Yu came over, he asked Su Pei to withdraw his troops and choose to retreat to the mountain pass. This was to suppress the cavalry's advantage. The cavalry was not omnipotent, but ordinary infantry needed a lot of preparation to fight against cavalry. They also needed to coordinate with the terrain to be effective. For example, in mountainous areas, forests, and valleys, the cavalry's combat strength and survival ability would be greatly reduced. The terrain of Sichuan Plain was vast. It was simply a paradise for cavalry. Not to mention that Lu Shi had the heavy cavalry battalion under his command. No matter how strong their defense was, they would not be able to withstand the joint attack of thousands of heavy cavalry. Instead of choosing to fight head-on, it was better to retreat and use the terrain to stabilize the military situation. Han Yu was cautious by nature. If this battle had been handed to him from the beginning, even if he did not know the strength of the enemy, he would have chosen the safest way to fight. After stabilizing the situation, he would then think of ways to expand the results of the battle. Blindly greedy would only cause him to be consigned to eternal damnation. His choice was a harsh slap to the face of the previous strategist. However, Su Pei valued Han Yu so much that he could not even speak sarcastically. Han Yu did not know how the other party felt. He was only concerned about the situation of the battlefield, such as the losses in the previous battle. When Su Pei withdrew his troops and retreated to defend, Xianxia knew that Han Yu had come out again. Isn't he at home closing his door to guests? Is that a disguised form of confinement? Han Yu was Xianxia's nemesis. Xianxia had no temper at all when faced with this fellow. Qin Gong said, Han Yu is Su Bei's most trusted strategist. The two of them had a small conflict, but it will not be a stalemate forever. Ordinary couples fight at the head of the bed and reconcile at the end, not to mention the importance of this battle. Even if Han Yu has a grudge against him, he will not sit idly by. Xianxia, who was originally burning with anger, could not say a word. Qin Gong's honest analogy made him feel like he could not bear to look straight at it. Xianxia did not speak. Qin Gong asked again, "Strategist, is it possible that I have said something wrong?" "No." Xianxia put down his hand and coughed softly. "It makes sense." Qin Gong asked, "What should we do now?" Su Bei's army has retreated and the surrounding area is filled with forests and hills. If Su Bei and his men were to stay here, the combat strength of the cavalry would be equivalent to being crippled unless they found a way to lure them out. Of course, the other way was to attack by force. This would increase the number of casualties. Just as Xianxia was hesitating, the messenger sent news that their lord had dispatched troops to the front line. Xianxia, no way. Their lord had finally settled down for a while. Why did she suddenly run to the front line? If their lord wanted to show off in the battle, how could he dissuade her? I'm done for, Xianxia mumbled. Qin Gong asked, what's done for? I'm done for. Chapter 1175. Xianxia didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that something was wrong with his lord these 2 days. She was like a firecracker that would explode at the slightest touch. Fengjing, how do you feel after following the lord to attack the city for the past 2 days? Xianxia did not dare to ask Jiang Pingji directly, so he tried to get information from Qin Gong in private. Qin Gong was silent for a moment. He thought of how his lord had charged into battle and couldn't help but shiver. Only after a long while did he speak hesitantly. My lord is a true man. Xianxia, Bolsh *T, isn't this something that everyone knows? Who asked you about this? Xianxia asked, don't you think that lord has been particularly angry recently? Usually they did not reveal themselves and looked very normal. However, when they fought, they were several times more ferocious than before. They fought without any regard for their lives. Although they did not manage to break through Su Bei's army's defensive line, after 2 consecutive days, Su Bei's defense seemed to be straining. Qin Gong asked hesitantly, really? I have only been with His Highness for a short period of time and do not understand him as well as the military counselor. After saying that, the upright young general revealed an ashamed expression, as if he had committed a grave mistake. Xianxia said, our lord is not like this usually. She knows when to stop fighting. She can avoid getting hurt, she will. Unlike now, Qin Gong. It turned out that in the eyes of his military counselor Yang, the lord's arm being scratched by a stray arrow was also considered an injury. It was really just a scratch on the arm. He had seen it before. The wound was as long as a pinky finger. It was shallow and only the skin was scratched. Xiaxi's worries were not unreasonable. Jiang Pingji indeed vented her negative emotions through the war. She had killed to her heart's content, but it was a pity for those who had died under her blade. None of them had a complete corpse. The god-slaying blade had a unique origin. It was a weapon that was on par with the Federation's marshal's blade. It could easily slice through space armors, much less a human body. She killed for a while until her arm was scratched by a stray arrow. A slight pain came from her arm and she calmed down. No matter what happened to the original Lu Shi, the owner of this body was her, not anyone else. If Lu Shi wanted to take back his body, Jiang Pingji would not be so thick-skinned as to forcefully occupy it. But if she had the idea of reaping the fruits of victory and forcefully taking over everything that did not belong to her, then she could not blame Jiang Pingji for being ruthless. Jiang Pingji recovered from her low spirits and returned to her usual self. His main focus now was to conquer the world and take over the entire farm as soon as possible. By then the people hiding in the dark would jump out. What could be more frustrating than being knocked down from the peak when you were about to win? Jiang Pingji had never been a kind person. Since he had offended her to death, then don't blame her for being ruthless and taking revenge. She was able to restrain her ambition and climb her way up from a genetic warrior to the position of the commander of an entire army. How could she not have some patience? Nothing was important as long as she was the final winner. Jiang Pingji confronted Su Pei at the front lines. The group quietly departed from Hejian County and headed north to Chongzhou. When Gu Zhen appeared in front of Madame Hu, the latter was stunned. Why didn't you stay in Hejian County to recuperate? Why did you come here? Madame Hu was dressed in plain clothes. Even though she had no makeup on, her natural charm was enough to make all the women in the world jealous. He put you under house arrest? Gu Zhen frowned and looked around at the decorations in the house. It was cold and bleak. Madame Hu said, isn't it obvious? Why did he do that? The second madam did not understand. It's because I let Zhao escape. He wanted him to marry a hunter's daughter. Zhao doesn't like it and neither do I, Madame Hu sneered. Her plump red lips were cold. Just because of this reason he locked me up here. Gu Zhen's expression was very solemn. How could this be? Madame Hu said, why not? Lanting hasn't even unified Dongqing yet. and he already thinks of himself as the emperor. Faced with Madame Hu's sarcasm, the second madam said, "Bai Dai." Madame Hu said, "Humph, are you here to persuade him?" The second madam said, "Of course not. I think you've misunderstood something." "Shut up, Gu Zhen." Madame Hu was so angry that she stood up and glared at the second madam. She sneered and said arrogantly, "I've said it before. Don't mess around in front of me. She's just the daughter of a concubine who stole Gu Min's status. I don't need you to interfere with what I do." The two of them did not have a good relationship. They could maintain a facade in front of outsiders, but once there was no one around, they would completely reveal their true colors. Gu Zhen's expression changed. She said, "I really don't know what's wrong with you. Why have you treated Lu Xi like this all these years?" She still remembered that Bai Dai and Lu Xi had a good relationship. They were childhood sweethearts and cousins. After Lu Xi married Gu Min, the two of them rarely contacted each other. Later, Bai Dai became Lu Xi's concubine. Logically speaking, the two of them should have been closer, but now they were like enemies. There was almost no buffer time for such a big change. It was as if everything had changed overnight. "You don't need to care about this." Madame Hu's attitude was overbearing and unreasonable. Gu Zhen said, "If it wasn't for my sister, I wouldn't have cared about you." Madame Hu said, "Don't be so arrogant. You can say nice things, but you still have to snatch. Can you refute that?" There were a few things that she hated the most in her life. One of them was that Gu Zhen had replaced Gu Min as Lu Xi's legal wife. Although Lu Xi was not a good person, only Gu Min was worthy of the position of legal wife. Gu Zhen did not want to be entangled with Madame Hu on this issue. The two of them had argued over this issue more than 100 times. Gu Zhen said, "I know your temperament. There must be a reason why your attitude towards Lu Xi changed so much. I asked you before, but you always refused to tell me. Now that your relationship with Lu Xi is so strained, are you still going to hide it from me? Does this have anything to do with my sister?" Madame Hu said, "If I said that Gu Min did not die of illness, but was strangled by Lu Xi with a white silk, would you believe me?" Gu Zhen's eyes widened and her mind went blank when she suddenly tossed out a huge bomb. "Bai Dai, what did Bai Dai say? Are you kidding me? How could brother-in-law use a white silk too? This was simply the biggest joke in the world. Why not? I saw it with my own eyes. Although I didn't see the person, I saw the shadow through the door and window. It was indeed Lu Xi who strangled her with a white silk." Gu Zhen finally revealed the secret that she had suppressed for more than 10 years. The next day, Lu Xi pretended that nothing had happened. He even pretended to show such a disgusting expression, as if he was really in love with Gu Min **T. It was all fake. Gu Zhen really wanted to say something, but the door outside suddenly opened. The two of them heard the movement and turned their heads in unison. They saw a middle-aged man in a scholar's robe standing at the door.